Good afternoon, everybody. Before we start the meeting, today we've had apologies from Councillor Taylor, so I'm therefore seeking a nomination for somebody to chair the meeting. Do we have a nomination from anybody, please?
We nominate Councillor Walshaw.
And that second. All those in favour of Councillor Walshaw? Yep. Okay, I think we've got a majority there, so Councillor Walshaw, if you want to take the chair.
Can we remind people about photos?
Thank you very much for that. Thank you, colleagues. Yeah, it's probably whether it's time to remind people to switch their mobile devices to silent, please, for the purposes of the meeting. So, hi, whoever is that, could you please switch the mobile device off, please? Thanks very much. Right, folks, welcome to South and West Plans panel. As you've heard from Andy, our esteemed clerk, I'm Councillor Neil Walshaw, heading Lean Hyde Park Ward. I'll be chairing this afternoon's meeting. Today's meeting has been live streamed on the City Council YouTube channel so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. South and West Plans panels deals with applications from the south, north, west and west of the city. The aim of the panel is to hear all the relevant information from applicants, members of the public and council officers to help members of the panel make their decision. So in our usual manner, we're going to do some introductions. So as I've said, I'm Councillor Neil Walshaw and I'll just go to my left.
Afternoon, Adam Ward, Southwest Team Leader.
Hello, I'm John Booth, Principal Engineer Highways.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Denise Reagan, Berman Softon, Richmond Hill Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Sharon Hamilton, Mewood and Moortown Ward.
Good afternoon, Jordan Bowden, Councillor Roundhay.
Afternoon, John Garvani, Councillor Horsforth Ward.
Good afternoon, Jules Hesselwood, Councillor for Bramley and Stanley Ward.
Afternoon, I'm Robert Finnegan, I'm a councillor for the Morley North Ward.
Good afternoon, my name is Trish Smith, I'm the councillor for the Pudsey Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Barry Anderson, Adeline Wharfdale Ward.
Good afternoon, Andy Booth, clerk to the panel.
Nicky Dio, legal advisor to the panel today.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Steve Butler, Group Manager for South and West Leeds and Lead Officer at South and West Plans panel.
Thank you very much, folks. Right, let's move on to our agenda. Andy?
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item number 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under item number 2, there are no items which require the exclusion of press and public. Under item number 3, I'm not aware of any late items of business today. Moving on to agenda item number 4, could I ask members if they've got any interest to declare?
I do, Chair. I do. I must remember, I am actually chairing the meeting. It's a good stop. Thank you, Councillor Reagan. Right, more seriously, item 10, it's a panel request that I've put in and I've lodged an objection to the application. So at that point, I'll be recusing myself from the chair and we'll need to elect a chair for that item from my learned colleagues. That's mine. Councillor Anderson.
Sorry, in respect of item 9, I gave the applicants advice to try and help with the smooth running of getting this through. And I am also a member of Headingley Rotary who are connected to that as well. So again, like you, I'll be recusing myself from that particular item.
Thank you very much for that. Andy, you want to continue?
Right, thank you, Chair. Item number 5, apologies. We have apologies today from Councillor Campbell and Councillor Taylor.
Great, thank you very much. Right, let's turn to the minutes. Now you'll find those on page 9. Now I don't know how Councillor Taylor usually does her minutes. Does she go through page by page or does she take them as read and move to any matters arising? The latter. Okay, so we'll take those as read. So minutes of page 9 through to, as we are a wordy bunch, to page 17. Has anyone got anything they'd like to raise on the minutes? Any matters arising? Not seeing any. In that case, can somebody move the minutes as a true record? Thank you, Councillor Reagan. Right. Those okay? Everyone okay? Meeting okay with that? Yep. Nods. Brilliant. Okay. So that's item 6 out the way. Any other matters arising that we need to discuss at this point? No? Okay, good. Right. In that case, if everyone could turn the hymn sheets to page 19, that's item 7, which is sometimes called the doggy item in conversation regarding this, but more seriously, it's the change of use of land, paddock and woodland territorial pet recreation exercise facility at Carr Farm Lodge. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Could we just move on to the first slide, please? Thanks. This was previously reported to panel back in February, which also included a panel site visit that morning. Just by way of, before starting the presentation, just a slight error at paragraphs 5 and 13 in the report. Reference is made to number 22 Clara Drive. It is actually, in fact, number 28 Clara Drive, so apologies for that. In summary, and for the benefit of new panel members, which we've got here today, the proposal is for a change of use of the land to a dog exercise area with associated fencing. The proposal is for dogs with behavioural issues or dogs that are more timid and suffer from anxiety, and also dogs that would be trained in an exercise area in a secure environment. And that would take place both in a paddock area, which is this area here to the north of the buildings, and a more wooded area to that side there, which backs onto Clara Drive. Site sits in a semi-rural area, but it's also adjacent to residential properties, and it immediately abuts number 28 Clara Drive, and that's that property just there to the northeast. At the last panel meeting, officers explained that there was no agreed methodology for assessing noise from dog barks just because of the unpredictable nature of such uses, and on balance put forward a positive recommendation to approve the application. However, members had concerns over the impact on neighbours and consequently deferred the application for the reasons set out in paragraph 2 of the current report. Since then, the applicant has given consideration to the matters set out by members and has agreed to a number of amendments, if you like, or conditions. And those would be to limit the number of dogs on site at any one time, to reduce the hours, particularly during the winter months, to provide acoustic fencing along the boundary with number 28 Clara Drive. They also confirmed that no external lighting would be proposed as part of the development, that an all-weather parking space would be provided, but they also could not agree the removal of the woodland from the proposal. That forms an integral part of their scheme. So in terms of noise, and that was the pertinent issue which members discussed last time, you might recall that a late noise report, noise impact study, was submitted on behalf of a local resident just before panel, and it was difficult to fully assess that without the benefit of any comments from environmental health, which at the time we didn't have the benefit of consulting them. Now, given that members resolved to request consultation with environmental health, we've sought their views on the current proposal, in conjunction with the noise reports that have been put forward by the objections, but also by the applicant's proposed mitigation measures to seek to alleviate any harm resulting from the development. So in terms of what environmental health have said, it's not that common for it's very common for environmental health departments to receive complaints regarding barking dogs due to the perceived loudness. And implementing mitigation measures to reduce noise can be quite challenging. Environmental health recognised that there is no recognised international or British standard that recognises an assessment methodology for dog barking. However, they looked at the objectors' noise impact assessments and agreed with the conclusions that they reach in terms of the methodology of how they've compiled the data and the mitigation measures that could potentially be assessed. In terms of what environmental health said, they observed the site, they visited the site, they observed distant traffic, but given the levels submitted in the acoustic report, the existing noise situation was highly unlikely to provide any masking. The report also alluded to a number of factors which would contribute to loss of immunity, including the duration, frequency of barking, which remain unknown. However, leaving dogs in external areas will generate noise, commented the environmental health officer, which would be difficult to avoid. Therefore, leaving residents the only option of avoiding noise by leaving their property. The environmental health officer concluded that given the predicted noise levels and the perceived annoyance factor associated with barking dogs, the evidence indicates barking will be intrusive in internal and external areas of nearby residential properties, leading to an unreasonable loss of amenity. Implementation of noise mitigation measures by the operator would be difficult with the over-reliance on noise management strategies. On that basis, environmental health recommended that the application should be refused. So officers have taken those revised or additional comments on board, which they did not have the benefit for originally, and have recommended refusal with a reason for refusal set out in the report. In addition to the noise issues, the objectors raised issues associated with the impact on the greenbelt and considered it to be inappropriate. However, officers have fully assessed the proposal in terms of policy N33 and also the MPPF, and officers consider it not to be inappropriate development. It preserves the openness of the greenbelt and therefore it is an acceptable use. So on that basis, the impact on the greenbelt does not form a reason for refusal. However, there is a reason for refusal based upon the impact on local residents. And on that basis, the recommendation is for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, we'll do questions for officers after we've had speakers. I just want to bring in Mr. Butler at this point to explain why there are speaking rights.
Chair, thank you. Members will recall that the previous recommendation was for approval, but the Chair has exercised his right to extend the speaking rights on this item following the receipt of the Environmental Health Officer's consultation response, which triggered a reversal of the previous recommendation presented to panel. And as Adam's just explained, it's now for refusal. So I thought it was appropriate to extend the rights for that reason.
Thank you for the explanation. Right, so objecting to the application, Mr. Dand?
Sorry, Chair, it's the other way around. Refusal.
My apologies. Ms. Goodall, so you've got 4 minutes from whenever you're ready to start.
Thank you. Thank you. I understand, but I'm slightly disappointed by the recommendation that's for our application, which has been declined solely as a result of a noise report, which was submitted by the objectors. This report is not independent. It was bought and paid for by the objectors. The report is based entirely on speculation and guesswork. As the dog park doesn't yet exist, reporting on how many dogs will bark, how loudly and how long is just ridiculous. The report does not take into consideration the hedges and trees between our property and 28 Clara Drive or the coach house, which we also proposed adding to, and which will help to baffle the sound. The report does not mention the installation of acoustic fencing, which was suggested at the panel on the 17th of February. However, the report from the objectors does suggest that planning permission should be declined unless detailed noise impact assessment and approved mitigation measures are implemented through conditions. So surely that means I should be given the opportunity to set up and trial mitigation measures. And with respect, the EHO report seems a little bit weak and done the bare minimum. It doesn't contest the submitted noise report in any way, but simply rehashes it with no original information or data. Once again, the addition of acoustic fencing and extra planting is not considered. Furthermore, the EHO report, as you've just mentioned, is flawed as it talks about leaving dogs in outdoor areas, which seems to imply that dogs would be left alone and unsupervised. This has never been the case and would never be allowed. And finally, a word about opening hours and numbers of dogs. These are maximum figures. In reality, it's highly unlikely that we'll be booked up all day, every day. And the figure of 8 dogs during a short period of the day was included simply to allow professional walkers or trainers to use the field, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they will. Looking at similar facilities, the majority of users tend to be individuals with their own 1 or 2 dogs. And the field will be rented by the hour, not per dog. So there's no benefit to me in encouraging larger groups. So just in conclusion, this application started life as a very small project to make good use of a neglected plot of land and the opportunity for me as a small business owner to expand the business and offer a service which is badly needed in the area. There was never an intention to create an over-commercialised facility to cut down trees or damage wildlife. Neither was the expectation of making a lot of money by the time the required alterations were made and the rent paid. But we did hope to work closely and sympathetically with neighbours. However, this was completely undermined when we were met with intimidating solicitor letters, personal confrontation, and a barrage of objections, a few of which were valid, but most unfounded and some absolutely ridiculous, from people who would not be affected in the slightest by the proposal, but who, unlike me, seem to have unlimited funds to fight their case. This whole experience has left me feeling bullied and intimidated and has made me quite unwell. Only with the support of my family and friends have I made it here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Do members have questions? Councillor Hamilton, yep.
Can I just ask you, will there be dogs staying overnight?
No.
Thank you.
I was going to ask that self-same question myself. Do you have any further questions for our speaker? Looking around? No. In that case, thank you very much.
Okay.
So we have a moment for people to step back, and then objections to the application, Mr. Dehan. Thank you very much. You've got 4 minutes from whenever you're comfortable.
Thank you for allowing me to address the committee. After we last met, and in order to satisfy the environmental impact with regards to noise pollution of the proposed development, the residents of Clara Drive undertook a comprehensive noise impact assessment. I would like to refer to this now. The National Planning Policy Framework states that planning policies and decisions should aim to avoid noise from giving rise to significant adverse impacts on health and quality of life as a result of a new development. The assessment replicated the sounds of dogs barking and measured the noise impact at 1 metre, 3, 5, 10 and 20 metres. This was done twice, both at my house and the opposite house to the proposed development, the Coach House. Both times each measurement breached the national guidelines for noise pollution. The World Health Organization recommend a maximum internal noise criteria of 35 decibels, and as the report shows, readings were measured way in excess of this. Planning practice guidance states that there is a high risk of significant adverse health impact, unable to use garden and amenity space or have windows open for ventilation. And as the Environmental Health Officer now states in his report, the sound emitted from this proposed development cannot be mitigated, thus resulting in negative health repercussions and a loss of living amenity. To date, there are only 4 comments of support from Carverley community for this development, but 55 objections from the locale. This proposal is not supported by the local community. The applicant is running a commercial business which can occupy an alternative space which is not in breach of planning law and does not fall foul of environmental health regulations. We requested the committee to follow the advice and recommendation provided by the planning officer and to reject the application. We all recognise the importance of the public role the committee performs. That public role is encapsulated in the Leeds Council Code of Conduct that applies to all councillors and voting co-opted members of the council when they're acting in their official capacity. We refer to this because we're in the public domain, and this application is of interest to numerous parties who are viewing the proceedings online. Of course, we entirely accept that the committee is fully aware of their professional obligations, but we draw attention to the specific areas here. Paragraph 3 of the code refers to objectivity. You must make decisions based on the information before you, having had regard to any professional advice provided to you and in accordance with the view of the public interest. Decisions on merit. This includes when making appointments, awarding contracts or recommendations. Further, paragraph 5 of the code refers to openness. Must be as open as possible about your actions and those of the authority and should be prepared to give reasons for those actions. We submit that the committee should reject the application and follow the professional advice provided by the planning officer with specific reference to 1, the council's environmental health assessment, 2, the unchallenged expert evidence provided by residents of Clara Drive, 3, the application is in breach of the core strategy policy P10 or saved unitary development plan policy GP5, and 4, the application is in breach of the policy of the National Planning Policy Framework 2021. There is no evidence that contradicts any of the above. The public interest is discharged by following the planning officer's advice and taking full account of the harm to the living conditions of Clara Drive residents through noise and disturbance from barking dogs. We hope that the planning officer's recommendations to refuse this application are acted upon and request that the committee provides full reasons for its decision should this not be the case. As an add-on, after listening to the applicant's words, this has also caused a lot of stress for me and my family. We are both NHS workers. We work long shifts. Our neighbour is an NHS worker. And post a pandemic, when we have felt absolutely under the cosh and done as much as we can, all we want to do is come home and enjoy the amenity of a house that we have moved into and enjoy the quiet residential space that we feel we're entitled to. This is extraordinarily stressful for all parties concerned. None of this is personal. We simply want to do what we think is correct, what the law says should be done, and enjoy the quiet amenities provided by a house. And all of the work that we have done, a considerable amount of work to oppose this, is simply our rights to do to make sure that the law is adhered to. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Do we have questions for our speaker? I've gone from myself as chair. The noise assessment they had done, those noise levels were estimates, weren't they, rather than measured? Or were they taken from other examples of similar facilities?
No, they were measured. So the noise, and it was an independent person that did it. It's not, yes, we paid for the report, but it is a contractor who has worked for Leeds City Council and submitted many reports to Leeds City Council, which have been accepted. We did not choose somebody whose credentials would be in question. They replicated the noise replicated by what dogs would make, and the report is as is, which suggests that it clearly shows that there would be a breach for the environmental health officer's recommendations.
I think my question is more actually, where were the noises from dogs? Where were they measured? Where were they taken from? Was it a similar type of facility?
Yeah.
Was it sample noises? Was it a general noise bank of dog noises to an accredited standard? I'm just wanting some clarity for it would probably help myself and panel members.
Yeah, so it was, they replicated it was a technical probe which replicated the noise that a dog bark emits, which there's evidence to suggest what that is. And then they moved around the area that the applicant wants to open and measured the sound in my house at numerous locations at my house and Steve's house opposite. And they measured the noise assessment of what they perceive to be dogs barking.
Okay, thanks. That's useful. Do we have further questions from members to our speaker? Not seeing any indication. In that case, thank you very much. So we'll segue neatly to questions for officers. Questions for officers, folks. In that case, if there's no questions for Adam, let's move to commentary and then we can move to decision. No comments. What a shy retiring bunch you are today. Councillor Anderson, thank you.
I would like, if possible, to make a comment after we've decided in terms of a recommendation I'd like to make to either Joint Plans Panel or Development Plans Panel as a result of what we've got before us today.
Yep. Well,
so it's not direct. It's not directly with this application. It's as an outcome of it.
Perhaps, Councillor Anderson, the matter can be concluded and then you can make that comment, which can be minuted and then shared with the appropriate plans panel or committee.
That's, yeah, entirely reasonable. So we have recommendations in front of us. Now, obviously, I wasn't chairing, I wasn't a member of the panel for the first time that came before us, and it was recommended for approval at that point, whether it was deferred to again the noise reports that we've discussed this afternoon, and that's changed the recommendations to refusal. Now, the refusal appears to be wholly based on that noise report. Now, if members are content to go along with the recommendations, we can move to a proposal if somebody's willing to do that, or perhaps there may be something else we could consider. Perhaps from the chair as a means to be helpful. I don't have a dog in this hunt, if you pardon the expression. We could look to perhaps change the recommendations perhaps to a temporary approval for a year to see how things go. These facilities come along very, very, very rarely. And it would be environmental health colleagues that would have to monitor it for a year. And then the permission could be revoked. That's an option to us. But the first pot of call, colleagues, somebody would have to perhaps move and second that. But a first pot of call, colleagues, is the recommendations we've got set out in front of us. And I'm looking at your Councillor Anderson. Do you want to move the officer's recommendation? That's fine. Do I have the sets of?
I'll move the proposal that you put
Right. Right. Okay. So, right, we have to go. Well, yes, we have to go with the amendment first. It's been a couple of years since I've chaired the plans panel, so I'm looking at my legal officer for help.
Right. Okay. So we have got Councillor Anderson, who has moved the officer recommendation. Chair, you have put forward an alternative and you've amended the officer recommendation, and Councillor has seconded that. Therefore, that gets voted on first, and then we go. If that falls, we go back to the original.
Good. Thank you very much, Nikki. That's most helpful. A question from Councillor Smith before we move to vote on.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I understand your reasoning for the amendment, I just wonder if we are putting the applicant to unnecessary cost should it fail. Because in order for it to work, they would still need to carry out their acoustic fencing and planting, etc. So I don't know whether we should consider that.
I understand where you're coming from, but I don't think that's a material consideration. The applicants, because they're putting the forward, they're taking the risk, as it were. We're putting the application forward. The first thing they would clearly, well, they would obviously have some. If they gain permission, full permission for today, they would still have to undertake those works. So for a year, that would be entirely up to them, I suppose. What I put as a suggestion is actually an amendment and a recommendation as Nikki set out. So, and Councillor Regan seconded it. So can we just want to come in, Steve, for a sec?
Situations often do get a little bit confusing, but just for absolute clarity. So what's on the table is a 12-month temporary permission to give the opportunity to monitor any complaints. So in the report you've got in front of you, it has the original conditions of the first report. So all those would be extant for that 12-month period, including the acoustic fencing, which is the risk for the applicants in terms of that. And of course, if members were to approve that, so it's for a 12-month temporary, at which time it would cease, unless they came back and actually we renewed it because we had another report that was saying there were no further concerns or concerns of not of any real relevance. So that's how it would fall. But that is at the risk of the applicant as to whether they then take up that suggested permission.
Everybody clear? Yeah. Nods around the room from members. Good. So can I show all in favour of the amended recommendations as Steve's just set out? Anyone against? 3 against. Any abstentions? Okay, so that's carried then. So that's a 12-month temporary permission with the full set of conditions that would have applied to a permanent permission. Right. Okay. That's the item closed away then. Thank you very much, folks, for attending. And then Councillor, yes, sorry, Nick.
I was just going to remind Councillor Anderson to make his.
What I was going to say is, on this occasion, we had information brought to us because the residents were able to afford to get this study done. Now, if at that meeting we had approved it, we wouldn't have had some of these considerations in it. So what I'm asking is, can we get a paper taken to either joint plans panel or development plans panel as to how we're going to deal with situations like this again? I accept that at the time it arrived too late for our consideration, but what do we do so that other people get fairness? And also how we can, because I personally do not understand the technicalities of the report that we got as to what's acceptable noise or what's not acceptable noise. And I would have thought the vast majority of members would be in the same position as myself. And I think we need to be given some training on how to take these reports so that we can put our own weight on them. You know, so as I say, I'm not trying to cause a ruckus or anything. I'm just trying to be constructive and move it.
Yeah, it's a fair point, Councillor Anderson. I'll bring in Mr. Carr at this point.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think the difficulty with this application was the lack of environmental health response initially to the consultation due to the difficulties they've had in resourcing planning application responses. That's now being rectified, so I wouldn't expect that to be replicated in future applications, in that we will get guidance, specialist guidance at an earlier stage of the proceedings, which will certainly help to avoid that type of situation again.
Can I just jump in?
Certainly.
Yeah. Just bear with us, colleagues, while we sort out some internal LTC planning service processes. I think it's a point well made, Councillor Anderson. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. That's absolutely fine. I think we'll be picking that up at another point, won't we? Thanks very much for that. Okay, Steve, do you anything to sum up, or are you fine with that? I think members are all clear what was approved. So
I think you summed it up, Chair, for me, so I don't think I need to do.
Lovely, nice one. Right, okay, so let's move on to agenda item 8. Nook Farm, Highmore Road, Tingley, which was subject to a site visit this morning. For anyone who was able to come to the site visits, it is an extremely pleasant spot, and I recommend visiting if people haven't already. And I do apologise. It is beautiful. I'm thinking of the one in Adderwall. I do apologise. I've turned too many pages over. Councillor Anderson, in my defence, it's 3 years since I chaired a plans panel. I'm having flashbacks to North and East as we speak. So we're just setting ourselves up for actually properly agenda item 8, which is, yeah.
Sure, Alex Sobel will be really pleased.
I'm sure we will be. Right, I think, colleagues, we're nearly ready. Promise I won't read out the wrong item title again. Are we good? Let's proceed.
Thank you, Chair. The application brought before members to the Plans Panel relates to a reserved matters application with the erection of 289 dwelling houses on 4 parcels of land set to the north and south of Hague Woods in West Ardsley. The application is brought before the elected members of the South and West Plans Panel following the resolution concluded by the South and West Plans Panel on the 14th of April 2022 to defer until further information, clarity and details have been received. The resolution sought the consideration of the provision of 4 and 5 bedroomed homes for affordable housing, the consideration of the provision of bungalows, further information on trees, including a full tree survey to include the quality of trees and details regarding carbon capture, further information on the compliance with street design guidance, more details on placemaking, more clarity on cycle segregation and footpath networks, and an invitation to a policy officer to discuss policy H4 and the housing mix, and further consultation with ward councillors. The recommendation brought back to members is made in light of the additional information that's been submitted in relation to the above details. The additional information has been publicised with the citing of further site notices and includes a revised layout, including the provision of 4 bungalows and affordable housing layout plan, further information relating to landscaping and arboricultural details, further details relating to design and placemaking, including a boundary treatment plan and a placemaking statement, further details relating to energy and sustainability, including an energy and sustainability statement and an electric vehicle charging point plan. The publicity given to the additional information is still ongoing as the site notices were posted around the site on the 18th of May 2022, and such notices allow comments until the 10th of June 2022. The wording of the recommendation is phrased to enable the application to be deferred and delegated to the Chief Planning Officer subject to the expiration of the publicity period and no new material considerations being raised. Should be noted that the additional information has not changed the proposal, certainly not to the detriment of neighbouring properties, i.e. siting them closer or making them higher, etc. And therefore such information would not be required by the Statement of Community Involvement to further publicise. To give update and a bit of housekeeping, just a couple of points. Firstly, it's to note there's a couple of updates with regards to the Chief Planning Officer's recommendation. There's a typo at Appendix 1, which should read as the Plans Panel of the 14th of April 2022 instead of the 9th of June 2022. Also, the end sentence of paragraph 45 of this deferral, Chief Planning Officer's recommendation should read: the overarching principles of design found within the National Design Guide and within the LPA's Neighbourhoods for Living and Street Design Guide are considered to have been fully complied with, and as such, the scheme is in its entirety is considered to be fully policy compliant and of a high design standard. Since the resolution was made at the plans panel, one further representation has been received from local residents. The points raised do not raise any new material considerations and relate in the main to their specific boundary and the impact of the development upon their amenity. Following an email that was sent to all Morley and Ardsley and Robin Hood ward members informing them of the receipt of the additional information, one email has been received from Councillor Finnegan, which outlined concerns that the information does not go far enough to address members' concerns. This then confirmed that it was sent on behalf of the Morley South Ward members. Following this email, objections were received from Councillors Newton, Senior and Kidger. The objection emails again raised no new material considerations. As of this morning, a further email has been received from Councillor Mulherron saying that she hadn't received the email. This was, I can confirm this was sent to all members on the 23rd of the 5th, and it was sent to Councillor Foster, Councillor Mulherron and Councillor Renshaw separately to the Morley ward members, but it was sent on the same day and it was the same email. A request has also been received from a local community group, West Ardsley Action Group, and 2 local residents to speak at the plans panel following the receipt of the additional information. And members will also be aware that further objection was sent by the West Ardsley Action Group to all members of this plans panel and officers again. Again, this doesn't raise any new material considerations, and all the issues have been addressed in the outline application as well as the original Reserve Matters Chief Planning Officer's report. It is noted, so going on to the actual appraisal and taking each point of the resolution in turn. Members will recall that concerns were raised regarding the mixture of house types and sizes, together with a mixture of house sizes offered for affordable housing contribution across the site. The applicant has submitted further details regarding these, and notably the proposal now includes 4 2-bedroom bungalows. To further corroborate the information provided within the housing mix assessment, the plans policy section of the planning department have again confirmed that the updated mix, including these bungalows across the site and the offer of affordable housing, is acceptable when viewed in the context of the housing mix assessment and a current affordable housing waiting list for the area. Should also be stressed that the housing needs assessment that's been provided is based on the evidence base required in the core strategy, i.e. the strategic housing market assessment. And furthermore, the affordable housing provision has also been confirmed to be required by the registered social landlord who will be delivering them. The affordable housing waiting list for both Morley and Ardsley and Robin Hood areas principally require 2-bedroomed affordable dwellings, although significant numbers of 1- and 3-bedroom houses are also required. The proposal offers a mix of affordable housing to meet these overarching requirements, and this is split in line with the policy requirements. The incorporation of the bungalows across the site increases the provision of 2-bed units within the housing mix, and accordingly, it is considered that the information that has been provided, the clarity that's been provided from further local planning officers is that this is an acceptable scheme and is fully compliant with core strategy policies H4 and H5. Turning to the landscaping and trees, the applicant has submitted significant details regarding the impact of the development upon the trees across the whole of the development site. And the information follows concerns raised by members that there'd be a loss of 3 mature trees at the entrance to the westernmost parcel of land accessed from Upper Green Avenue. The applicant has looked at the landscaping across the site in significant detail, and a package of information shows the quality of individual and group trees and further landscape improvements that are to be undertaken. The information also outlines the trees that are to be removed due to health reasons. The strategy of the overall landscaping is considered to be of significant benefit to the ecology and the biodiversity of the overall site, and any trees lost are sufficiently mitigated against with further landscaping provisions and enhancements. In relation to the specific concerns regarding the trees at the entrance to Upper Green Avenue, the applicant has further looked at these trees, and it is proposed to retain tree that is labelled T66. However, regrettably, the trees T68 and T67 are required in all instances to be removed to provide access to this part of the site. It has been confirmed by the applicant that the deviation in the route of the road would still require the removal of these trees due to the topography and narrow shape of the site and the pinch point at the entrance. It should be stressed, though, that the site allocation plan and the outline consent have allocated the site for development, and this access is to be used and has been approved by the outline consent. Unfortunately, there is no other options available to provide access into this part of the site. However, in assessing the overall impact of the proposal upon the existing landscape, notably, it is stressed that the proposal does facilitate long-term improvements to the ancient woodland and the large group of existing trees around the site that would otherwise not be managed in an effective way. The site as a whole retains the vast majority of existing trees and hedgerows and will landscape the development to mitigate any losses sufficiently enough to make sure that the proposal is fully compliant with policy requirements. Turning to placemaking and design, members may recall that the concerns were raised with the overall scheme and how the design would contribute to overall placemaking of the area. The original report to members sought to address the issues of design in relation to the scale, layout, appearance, and landscaping of the site. Members raised concerns regarding general street designs and the overall approach and connectivity of the scheme, and also questioned whether renewable energy sources such as solar panels could be incorporated. The proposal is relatively unique insofar as the proposal has 4 parcels of land that have been proposed to be comprehensively developed to ensure the ancient woodland and areas around there can be landscaped, managed and enhanced, and furthermore made accessible to the wider community through new public rights of way. The proposed development has been laid out to ensure the topography of the site is utilised and development reflects the characteristics of the surrounding area. The house types and sizes are reflective of the wider areas they sit in, and all parcels of land utilise views and vistas of ancient woodlands that sit centrally within them. The design reflects the surrounding area's character where possible, such as the new bungalows proposed are set close to the already existing bungalows, and the house types and sizes reflect on all parcels the surrounding residential properties in terms of height, scales and massing. The individual house designs are considered to be of a high quality, and the use of renewable energy sources such as PV panels and air source heat pumps is welcomed. The National Design Code seeks to promote and enhance the inclusion and community cohesion, and this proposal in the broadest sense does achieve this, as it's in a unique position that the development offers the ability to ensure the woodlands are opened up to the wider community, enhanced and protected for not only the new residents, but the wider community in general. The open spaces and landscaping are considered to build upon the existing green infrastructure used by the existing community. The open spaces and layout of the site provide legible and logical routes through the site and are inviting to the wider residential communities through the opening up of the woodlands and new connectivity through new public rights of way. The boundary treatment plan has submitted, which further demonstrates that the spaces are to be defined and treated in a way that enhances legibility through the site and defines and makes this place. The proposed layout shows a strong hierarchy of streets which accommodate various types of movement in a convenient and safe manner. The approach enables good navigation through the site, but also enables the users to understand the transition between roads where the motor vehicles may be more dominant and roads that primarily are residential streets. The SPG relating to street design gives guidance on standards that will be required to allow highways to be put forward for adoption. But it should be stressed that the guidance is worded with flexibility and that it has been recognised and accepted through the outline consent that the approved 5 access points. It was the master plan was, although indicative at the outline stage and provided through the site allocation plan, always indicative as it may have been, did mean that the streets design guide had been given due consideration at all those stages. Cycle and pedestrian links. Reserve Matters proposal enhances the existing footpath connections with surface upgrades and is sensitively designed, which immeasurably improves the pedestrian connectivity of the site as a whole. 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in the development parcels will render shared use of the proposed highway safe for cyclists and motorists. And the balance of providing good public rights of way and minimising the impact of the paths upon the wider ecology of the site are considered to be acceptable in terms of all planning policies. To conclude, the proposed housing layout is a unique design that is considered to be grounded by good design principles, which in turn will create the foundations for a strong community. The density of the housing enables efficient use of the allocated site, whilst the housing design and layout facilitates good residential and visual amenity. It's considered that the applicant has sufficiently addressed the concerns raised by members and that the proposal is fully policy compliant. As such, the recommendation, as it was in the plans panel of the 14th of April, is recommending approval, subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
We're just going to bring up a few key slides for benefit of new panel members. Just bear with us a moment.
Could I have the slide that's numbered 21, please? For the new members, the four parcels of land for development straddle the ancient woodland, which is in the applicant's control, but doesn't form any physical development. The enhancements include new footpaths that will link wider residential areas into the woodlands. In terms of the points that were raised and the reasons for deferral, a key, the applicant of note, it's key that 4 bungalows have been provided at members' requests, which are to be located on this parcel of land, which is next to existing bungalows. In terms of the reason for deferral for the trees, members may recall the site visit that there was 3 trees that were to be sited here. As I've just pointed out, this has gone back to the applicant and they have done further assessments. They've included arboricultural assessment details for across the site. And whilst these trees have unfortunately and regrettably have to go, it is, as outlined in my report, in the Chief Planning Officer's report, the access has been approved at outline, and the indicative master plans have always seen this to be a linear development in that parcel of land. Thank you, Chair.
Right, no, thank you. So, questions for officers. Councillor Finnegan, you're first up.
Sorry, I have 3, 1 to the legal officer, 1 to the highways officer and 1 to the planning officer. How do you want to deal with it, Chair? I'm in your hands.
In that order, I think.
1 at a time or all 3?
Oh no,
at the same time.
Do them in that order, all 3 at once, but in that order, yeah.
Okay, to the chief legal officer, taking into account we've just heard about speaking rights, the previous application, why was the legal advice in this particular case to exclude the community from being able to comment on what has been a controversial application? They were excluded from being able to address this particular panel with the significant concerns that they raised. I'd like to understand the legal process that led to that refusal. In terms of the highways officer, we're looking at parcel A at this particular point. The street design guide, paragraph 3.25. This doesn't comply with that, does it? Second question, could follow up if the highways officer wants to respond to that one. In terms of the planning officer, I'm particularly interested in policy H4, which is about housing mix. We had a big and very contentious discussion last time about housing mix, and by and large, very little has changed. We've been offered 1% bungalows, even though we had significant concerns last time. But in terms of the obligations under H4, which talks about developers should submit a housing needs assessment addressing all tenures so that the needs of the locality can be taken into account at the time of development. So now, why are you using the same assessment that is the SHMAR assessment, which is now 5 years out of date? And why wasn't the housing manager consulted on local housing need? Because he's confirmed as of this morning that nobody from planning has been in touch with him whatsoever to talk about local housing need. How can policy H4 be complied with at a point where you're using details and figures that are 5 years out of date and you don't talk to the housing manager? Thanks, Chair.
Right, thanks for that. So we'll do legal, we'll do highways, and then we'll do all the planning questions for Mark. So, Nikki.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Finnegan. I'm aware that there have been some requests to engage further speaking rights. It's a matter of public record that the residents who registered their request to speak did so at the last plans panel, which was subsequently deferred. Now, there is a protocol in relation to public speaking, which all of members are aware of. And in that, it makes it clear that members of the public are only entitled to address the panel once, unless significant, and I place emphasis here, new material considerations arise out of significant new information. Now, the information here before you is the same material considerations which members required further information from officers to go away and get that information so that you could further consider and make a proper planning decision on this matter. So in accordance with that protocol, the legal advice is clear that there are no new significant information that arises. They're within the scope of the same material consideration, and that is a report before you, and therefore further public speaking rights are not triggered. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks for clearing that up. Okay, Howie's colleague. Yep.
Hello. When you say it doesn't comply with 3.25, that refers to the table, which has got lots of different things in there. Having read the WAG submission, I am presuming that you're referring to the length of cul-de-sac. Am I right in that one?
50 to 200 dwellings, cul-de-sac should be avoided where possible.
Yeah.
If absolutely necessary, they should have a maximum length of 200 metres. So in this case, cul-de-sacs aren't being avoided.
I think Councillor Finnegan, can you use your mic for that because it's less illuminating for people at home.
I do apologise, Chair. The paragraph that we're debating, 50 to 200 dwellings, this is their design guide. Cul-de-sacs should be avoided where possible. Well, they haven't been, clearly. And they should have a maximum length of 200 metres. They're more than 200 metres long. So it must be a breach. All I'm wanting really is a yes or a no. It either is or it isn't a breach.
It might be instructive at this point if we could bring up the plan of the layout of the site. Just colleagues can speak to that with that on reference on screen.
Yeah, parcel A, if you want to have a look at it, it's specifically the section that deals with Upper Green Avenue.
Right, there we go. So it's now on screen. Okay.
Right, yeah. Sorry. Firstly, with regards to cul-de-sac, you're right, and it says avoid where possible. In this case, they've decided that it's not impossible to avoid that, or it's not possible to avoid it because of the shape of the site. So then, with regards to the length, I'm aware that WAG have suggested that the distance from the main road down to the site the proposed site access is more than 200 metres, which perhaps it may be, but in this case, the access in that location has already been approved.
Okay, Councillor Vigan, you want to come back on that?
So it's a breach. You're confirming it's a breach, but it's been approved. It either is or it isn't a breach.
I think the officer, if I may, from the chair,
it doesn't.
I think the officer was clear in that it's to be avoided where possible. There is a little bit of discretion in this, but obviously cul-de-sacs over a certain length had to be avoided, but it is where possible. So saying it's a breach is catchy and inflammatory language, I grant you, but it's not actually accurate in this case. Now, Mark, you want to come back in?
In terms of this particular issue, the sites were adopted and went through significant scrutiny at the site allocation plan. The outline when the site was allocated, as you can see, the irregular nature of the site has already been approved by the planning inspectorate, and we have adopted the site allocation plan. The access was then approved at outline stage. At all these points, it's been understood the design guidance, and I stress guidance has been there in terms of what we have has always been indicated and has been accepted by virtue of the outline application that approved the access. In terms of highway safety, if I point out on the way that adoptions will work, it ends up being there's different sections of materials to be used to slow down traffic, to ensure that there's a legibility and that people can understand the different areas where cars are going to be dominant or where it's more likely to pedestrian. So in terms of highway safety, it's considered to be acceptable in that respect.
Right. I think that's a comprehensive set of answers to Councillor Finnegan's questions. Councillor Anderson, you're next. Bear with me, Councillor Anderson. Mark, do you want to come back on H4? Yep.
To go on, so on the H4 and the housing mix, in terms of the policy, there is no requirement to include bungalows, and these have been offered up with good faith by the applicant. In terms of the housing needs assessment, my policy colleague will be able to answer why the SHMA is used as the evidence base. But what I should just point out is that the policy requirements for the housing mix says that housing needs assessment should be submitted by the applicant, which they have done, using the evidence base of the SHMA. Whilst that might be outdated or maybe 5 years old, that is the evidence base that is required to do the housing needs assessment. In terms of the looking at waiting lists for the affordable housing, as it's outlined in the Chief Planning Officer's report, they're using the SHMA and looking at what is required on the waiting list and what is confirmed by the registered social landlord. The offer of affordable housing is fully compliant with policy H5 in terms of the full provision is offered, and it meets the needs as identified in the housing needs assessment. My policy colleague, Dan, might be able to give a bit more information about the SHMA and its update.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon. So regarding the SHMA, it's used as part of the core strategy selective review evidence in 2019. It's intended to provide evidence over a planned period, so several years. It's the latest evidence we use to assess and implement policy H4 on applications. So we see the document is up to date, and as part of the housing needs assessment is robust to use.
Thanks for that. Concluded, colleagues? Yeah, finished? Yep. Okay, good. Right. Councillor Anderson.
I am not happy with the answers we've received to points 1 to 8 as to why, officers feel that things are satisfactory. For example, There was no explanation as to why more bungalows couldn't be provided. What did the applicant say when you asked them for more bungalows? Rather than the ones they've offered up, because there was a definite feeling from a number of us the last time we wanted more. So you would have been going into that negotiation needing to meet the needs of the plans panel, which was to request more. And so what arguments did the applicants give to you as to why they couldn't meet the needs of what we were doing? In respect of point 3, it's something that I go on around about all the time, and Councillor Finnegan does as well. We're talking about carbon capture here. We made it very clear at the last meeting that we have a climate emergency that we've declared. We want to know from planners how much carbon is being expended in these sites now and what the effect is. There are tools available, so it's not that the tools aren't available. If you want to use the tools, go to Leeds University. They will, for a start, give you them, as will the LGA give you tools to calculate this. Why has that not been brought back to answer the third point, which was to include the quality of trees and detail regarding carbon capture so that we know what's going to happen? Now, again, from a tree perspective, if our tree officers were here, the ones that we have to deal with on a daily basis, they will be able to tell you the asset value of a tree. They'll be able to tell you how much carbon is probably stored within it. They will be able to tell you how much it would cost. Why is that not being possible here, particularly on the tree that Councillor Hamilton raised the last time as well? Because that was something that there was broad consensus on at the last meeting. Councillor Hamilton raised the issue about the tree. What is the asset value of that tree? Why is that not here, justifying and explaining what the position is? Because these are the things that we're discussing when we're discussing the climate emergency. Why are we, as a plans panel, not discussing those? Because we think these are, and there's a whole raft of other ones. Because when it comes to the housing needs assessment, why can the applicant not be asked to provide an up-to-date assessment? Because, for example, I can only talk about my own ward. The housing needs assessment was done about 7 or 8 years ago. So what you're saying is that if an application was brought forward in my ward, you'd be quite happy to take something that's, the world has changed for good or for bad in that period. Housing needs have changed as well. The types of housing people need. I mean, you can't honestly say that you are meeting the needs of the public, because, as Councillor Finnegan has pointed out, you're not. Because if you ask a local housing manager, the local housing manager will tell you where the shortages of housing are. So we've got good qualified officers in housing, and we don't appear to be listening to them. Why not? Why are we ignoring our own officers' advice? It just seems peculiar in terms of that. And the final thing is, we did ask at the last meeting to have the outline conditions appended to this report. Why are they not here? Because we keep being told that this is, and I accept this outline has been approved, but nobody knows what the outline conditions were. And a number of us would like to know what was actually agreed. Now, why those weren't furnished in this report, we might have found them a bit irrelevant, but why not?
Right. Quite a few questions there, Councillor Anderson. I think officers have got answers to those, but Mark, do you want to lead off?
I'll go through them in order, but just first point, the decision notice with all the conditions is in the appendix of the package. So in terms of,
I'm sorry, planners seem to think that residents spend their time going onto the planning portal, going through each planning application, looking at which applications have come in to satisfy the conditions. They don't.
In terms of the appendix.
Yeah, but which ones have been satisfied?
But
which ones have been satisfied?
Right.
Which ones are outstanding? We need to know that.
We haven't discharged any of the conditions. So all the conditions are still relevant. In terms of the officer's report for the outline consent is in the appendix, together with the decision notice to show exactly what the wording of the conditions are. No conditions have been discharged at this moment in time. So all the details will, will have to be discharged following the determination of this application.
So my argument is, how do we as a panel know that the applicants are going to abide by these? Because we keep raising issues and we keep correctly being advised by officers that because it was agreed outline, we can't discuss it. And I agree with that. I actually agree totally with that. But there are a number of joined up things that need to be dealt with at outline, and there are things that are coming along now that interact with each other in terms of your maths. When you used to do your Venn diagrams, you've got all the conditions together. You've got some that are relevant to non-reserve matters and some that overlap with reserve matters. And there's the bit in the middle that cover both. That's the bit I'm talking about. How do we as a panel get that? Because we've got to explain back to residents. That's the problem today. It's not so much us making the decision, it's how do the local ward members go back to the community and say, well, the reason this wasn't relevant was because you've got WAG's report. It goes through a whole raft of things. Someone needs to give a detailed answer in this report to these issues. That's the point I'm making.
Right. Okay. Now, who wants to come back to Councillor Anderson's points? Mr. Butler?
Can I just a brief point. We were asked to provide the conditions from the previous outline application because members were a little bit concerned or slightly confused perhaps about the fact that the original application was determined at City and Strategic Panel, which is for the general outline, yet the reserve matters quite rightly, because it was a joint chair's decision to bring back the more detailed reserve matters to this panel. So at page 134, for the next 5 or 6 pages, you have all 30 conditions in full, which one has to assume the members have read. Therefore, I'm not sure what I can add to that particular comment. But if I can just finish, on the other part about how can we be sure that the conditions will be discharged? Well, that's just a fairly normal day-to-day activity, in that the conditions are there when the applicants are a position probably prior, because some of these are maybe pre-commencement conditions, that they will then submit that information to the City Council, and we will either discharge it, approve it or not. And if then the applicants for whatever reason are in breach of those conditions, then of course it becomes an enforcement matter. So I mean that's just the norm for this.
What my point is, on page 47, there are only 4 conditions attaching to this reserve matters, only 4, and they're so sort of vague that one of the things, again, I keep repeating, how do we write conditions that can actually then be enforced? That's the problem. None of those 4 conditions here would stand a chance of being enforced by the council, because I know from bitter experience that our officers will not be able to enforce those conditions because they'll say they weren't precise enough, they weren't exact enough, so we've got nothing to actually enforce against.
Chair, just to respond to that again, I'm surprised at the question really, because all the conditions that on the reserves, on the outline application are still relevant to be discharged as via the reserve matters. So in addition, so what you've got in effect is, in addition to the original 30 conditions or so, is the 4 that are presented on page 47. And the question about how do we know, and those cannot be enforced against, again, it's a question I'm a little bit surprised about, because actually it's the norm in terms of cutting down the amount of information that gets presented, because as you can see, the panel pack I've got here is very thick for this, is that we actually put the drafts, heads of terms of the conditions rather than the full text. And we've brought back the full text of the reserve on the outline application because members specifically asked for that. But if this application should be approved by a panel today, when the decision notice is issued, the 4 conditions will be in more detail, just as the conditions are commencing on page 134, and all 34 conditions will still then need to be discharged by the applicant. Okay.
So to summarise, it's 134, mostly rather detailed conditions that the applicant will have to discharge. I'm glad we've 34, sorry. Page 134. Numbers are clearly not my strong point today. What now? Mark, do you want to come in for Councillor Anderson's further points?
Thank you. So taking your points of starting points for negotiations on the bungalows and the carbon capture. It's important to note that in order to go back to an applicant, the starting point always has to be the planning policy. And in terms of the affordable, in terms of the bungalows that have been provided, there is not a policy requirement to ask for bungalows. So when I went back to the applicant, I've tried to look at it and ask them where can they put some, can they accommodate them in this without jeopardizing the overall viability of the scheme. They've offered four bungalows that are 2-bed, which increases the housing mix for the 2 beds. Also, they're sited in the location that is close to the existing bungalows. So again, it improves the scheme in terms of reflecting the immediate character of that area. But the policy, it was when the Chief Planning Officer's recommendation was put on the agenda previously, it was considered fully policy compliant. That is the important part here. And to go back to them, they have offered those bungalows in good faith. There was no policy requirement for them to provide those bungalows. So in that respect, we have improved, there's an improvement to the scheme, but it still remains that it was policy compliant before. Likewise with the carbon capture, whilst if you can appreciate the size of this site, the landscaping that is being proposed and the improvements, enhancement to the ancient woodland, as well as the landscaping in and around the actual development site, again, the policy does not give us the policy backing to insist on assessments of individual trees and their ability to capture carbon. What it does allow me to go back to a developer with is asking for more information about the arboricultural impact assessment, things like the health of the trees, which they have submitted as the further information to enable us to understand those trees at the entrance point. Why do they need to be taken out? What is the health of the clusters of trees that surround the site? How will they be enhanced? That is what the policy enables us to do. And that is the further information that has been given to us. So it still was considered to be policy compliant, but now we've got that additional information, which was requested to be considered and forwarded to members. So hopefully that explains the background of where negotiations went after the resolution of the plans panel had been concluded. Well, again, I'll pass this to Daniel.
Why don't we know what the needs are as at 2022? Forget about what happened before that. The world has changed. Why not something relevant to 2022?
The current, let's be clear, the current strategic marketing assessment has been found to be sound by so many government inspectors it could start its own record label. That is the data set we're doing we use at the moment. That is a legally sound set of data, Councillor Anderson. Just because you don't like it or don't think it's up to date doesn't mean it isn't germane to this process. It is. We will undoubtedly, in fairly short order, have the joys of going through another strategic housing assessment for us, both looking at sites and for housing mixes in the relevant areas. That will be forthcoming, no doubt, from forward planning colleagues. But at the moment, we have to use the data that is relevant, and officers have used that data, which is why they've said on multiple occasions, in that regard, this is policy compliant. Remind colleagues that planning is a quasi-judicial process where we use the policies and the data that is sound, I'm Scots using that expression, that is relevant now, not any wishes and horses that we may think we should be able to use. It's all very well saying we could just go to the university in Leeds and bring up a carbon capture methodology. Well, we can't, because that's not in policy at the moment. But this council is currently undertaking a climate emergency-led local plan review, which will give this council, I'm pleased to tell colleagues, absolutely globally leading edge policies with respect to the climate emergency in respect to planning. That's the good news. The bad news is statutory planning processes are long-winded, somewhat clunky, but we're going through them and we will have those plans in place as soon as possible. I hope that clarifies all those matters. Who's got questions next? Councillor Smith, by all means.
Thank you. I could just do with a little bit of clarity, if you don't mind. I'm going to go back to the trees at the entranceway that we were very concerned about. We've said that the access was decided at outline. I've read all the conditions, and number 1 says the accesses other than those approved under condition 3. Now, I read condition 3 about 30 times and I can't see anything relating to access. It's about start times. So I just wondered if I'm reading it wrong. Thank you.
So the description of the outline planning application is part of the planning application that outlines what the application was for, and that addresses the 5 access points. So when you're looking at the permission, the description outlines the accesses that planning consent relates to. And then the conditions refer to the plans which show the accesses in plan format.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Smith?
I realise it's already been agreed. I'm not arguing the point. I'm just asking, if we come back in 10 years' time, how does it lead us to that conclusion? Because I genuinely can't see it. I'm not being difficult. I genuinely can't see where it's saying about that.
Conditions relate to the plans. So the plans are the approved plans show the accesses, which are what the permission is for.
The point is really about the trees. You said we have to. It said it's approved that we could remove the trees because of the access that was agreed. The access is saying it was agreed in point three or condition 3. Condition 3 doesn't say anything about the trees or the access. That's what I'm confused about. So how do we enforce that?
Are we there? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry, Councillor Smith. Trying to put it more succinctly, the outline permission, which is not in front of you today, actually included the access on a plan, or the accesses has been fixed and approved. So the point of access into those sites, they are approved. On the parcel of land that you're referring to, partly, and Mark will do this better than I, because he knows it better than I, once you go into the site, there are topography issues, i.e. slopes, and it's very narrow. If that drawing could be pulled up again, or at least the detailed drawing that's got the trees on it that to be removed, please, Mark, if you know which one it is.
21, please.
No, sorry, there's another one. Bear with me.
Yep, I can point to the access.
Yeah, sorry, can I have it? Yes, for a second. Well, I do apologise because it's not that clear on here, is it? But so that was fixed at that point. Yeah. And then you come in and you can see you've not got along before actually the contours tip off down this slope towards the woodland, which of course nobody wants to interfere with. So where do you go at that point if you're going to actually access a strip of land that way, which is narrow, and into this? And that's a significant slope. You've no choice at that point but to actually spread to either side. And that's what's been referred to. And unfortunately, that's the exact point where the trees are that we're talking about. So the applicant's gone back and had a look at it. And with a little bit of reconfiguration, that has been retained. But the other two, unfortunately, are still lost because you have no choice.
And I think it's just worth mentioning that for highway safety, we look at having particular gradients. So the topography of the land, when we're talking about the gradients and the topography, that's why the length is dictated. So it wouldn't be a case of just directing it straight in. It has to meet gradients as well.
Thank you. I understand all of that. I just couldn't follow the conditions. That was all.
Fair enough, Councillor Smith. I hope we've clarified all of that. That's fantastic. Right. Any further questions? If not, we'll move on to comments. No further questions? Let's move on to comments and then let's move towards a determination. So comments, colleagues. Councillor Finnegan.
All the good it'll do me. In terms of this particular application, colleagues will know that we had a long discussion about H4, which is the housing mix at this particular point. Now, H4 is quite clear in saying that you have to look at the needs of the locality, taking into account at the time of development, not in 2017. Now, colleague down there in policy says you don't need to worry about what's happened over the last 5 years because it's solid at this particular point. We'll look at that. Now, the bizarre thing is if you look at page 58, you will see that what that tells us, this housing assessment, is what we need is 31% of one-bedroom apartments in terms of affordable housing. So those people on low income don't need houses. They need one-bedroom apartments, 31% of that, or a two-bedroom apartment, 12% of that. Now, when you look at the bigger houses for rich folk, 4-bedroomed and 5-bedroom detached amounts to 42% of that actual site. So great big houses. How many of those are affordable? None. Now, what do we get to try and offset that? We get told, oh, well, we'll chuck in a couple of bungalows because we're feeling exceptionally generous at this particular point. But the fact of the matter is, and you all know this in your own wards, you don't need me to tell it, that anyone who's suggesting that the housing need at this particular point, certainly for affordable homes, are more 1- and 2-bedroom apartments, needs their head examining, because that's clearly not the case. Now, the fact that you can do an assessment 5 years ago that you say is acceptable at this particular point, and that you don't consult your local housing manager who can tell you what the housing need is utterly bizarre. We're playing fantasy planning here. H4 is supposed to be relevant to where we are today, where we are at this particular point. And the housing mix is all over the place. What it does is it basically says, we'll adjust the housing mix to make sure that we make loads of money with 4- and 5-bedroom detached properties, but the bloody poor people can have 1-bedroom apartment because that's what it tells us is what is required in this local area. We won't bother asking the housing manager because his point of view isn't relevant. Now, not in a million years can this particular development be in tune with the development needs of this community. And it's not just this community, it's the outer southwest area, as I'm sure our policy colleague would have told us. So this complies, this is an obligation that is imposed on everywhere from Wortley, Farnley, Driglington, Gildersham, all the way through to Tingley, East Ardsley and beyond. So there's no localism at this particular point. You're in a situation where the rich and wealthy, 42% of this, that's what you're going to get out of this housing site. Poor people stuck in 1-bedroom apartments by and large at this particular stage. And the planners will tell you, you don't need to worry, council, because based upon some figures 5 years ago, it includes everywhere from Wortley all the way through to East Ardsley. It's absolutely compliant. Now, if that's the case, then I don't know what our role is. We might as well just be rubber stamping what the planners actually tell you at this particular stage. Now, Councillor Hamilton hasn't got her trees. He may or may not be comfortable with that. Councillor Cargill spoke very eloquently last time about the need for us to take climate change seriously and ask for those sequestration things, not getting any of those. There are 8 points that we're supposed to hit, including consultation with local ward members. And we were told at that particular point that consultation with ward members wasn't necessary. So I can't really see what our role is. If we're really saying that policy H4 is complied with, and this really is acceptable for people on low incomes in and around this particular area, then that clearly isn't supported by the evidence all of you are clearly aware of at this particular. If we're going to be serious on climate change and saying, well, right, you say 1 tree out of 3, that's great, and we don't understand the actual cost of losing what we've already got there, then again, we're playing around at it. We're not being serious about climate change. There is no way, based upon this housing mix and other concerns, that I can support this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Who's next? Councillor Anderson.
Say I would concur with what's just been said. I can't support it. The only thing I would go a bit further on is that, bearing in mind the last time we spoke about this, we've had elections in between times, so the chances of consulting with ward members has been very limited, and to actually sit down and have workshops or forum with the relevant councillors. Councillor Mulhern, I didn't know anything about it. Somebody else mentioned that she'd sent an email in, so she obviously feels she hasn't been kept fully informed. Never mind the other councillors; they can speak for themselves. But Councillor Mulhern appeared to indicate that she hadn't been kept fully informed. So I'm not happy with this application because there doesn't appear to have been, for the reasons that Councillor Finnegan pointed out, but also there doesn't seem to be any great effort to consult with ward councillors and to work with the residents in order to find solutions to this. It's been brought back very, very quickly. And as a result of that, it's meant that they've not been able to raise their concerns. And I accept the explanation from the legal officer. I'm not in any way disputing what the legal officer has said. I'm just saying, because of the haste in which we've done, it's giving the impression that the views of local councillors and local residents doesn't have as much weight in it as some of us on this side feel it should do.
Okie dokie. Thanks for that, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Hamilton.
I don't have much to say, Chair. I'm just going to say that whether we have election or not, we're still councillors and we need to continue to fulfil our duties. And I heard the officer say that the councillors were emailed with regards to the email we all received saying that they didn't get any notification. So on that, that's what I want to say. And I would like to move officer's recommendation.
Wow, right, okay. I've had Councillor Hamilton has moved the recommendations. I don't want to curtail further debate, but if no one's got any further commentary, we can move to vote on those recommendations. Mr. Butler, yep, and then we'll move to vote.
I do apologise because it should have been picked up earlier and I don't remember it being done so, but there is a slight alteration to the recommendation which stands as defer and delegate to the Chief Planning Officer for approval subject to specified conditions. But it's also, I'd like to add, for the expiration of the advertisement period, because the advertisement period I think runs out tomorrow, and if any new material consideration should come forward, obviously we bring it back to panel, but the likelihood of that happened. I just want to be clear that members understand that.
Yeah, that's what it says, defer and delegate to Chief Planning Officer, and that's what I'm supporting.
That's fine, Councillor Hamilton. That's very clear, and Councillor Regan has seconded it. Do you want to point out, I think this plan application has now been in front of City Plans Panel and Southwest Panel probably for about 7 or 8 hours in total deliberation time. People may or may not like the application, but I've never seen an application that hasn't benefited from coming in front of elected members of the City Council in whatever panel they sit on. And that's the case here, whether or not we particularly like this panel. So at this application, rather, apologies. This panel I did, sorry. I am rather rusty, it appears today. However, my apologies, colleagues. We have had a proposer and a seconder, so can we move to a vote? All those in favour of the recommendations, raise your hand.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
All those against? Thank you. Any abstentions? Obviously not, no. Well, thank you very much for that, colleagues. That's finished that item. I suggest we have a comfort break for 5 minutes, folks. Yeah, thank you.
Don't forget to mention that Councillor Anderson recused himself, and then we've got to let him back in just before you depart. as it were.
Okay, we have indeed, yes. Right, folks. Right, so if we could turn to agenda item 9, page 149. Now, this is absolutely definitely Craghouse Farm this time, which was subject of a site visit this morning, and I recommend it as a place to visit in Leeds. Councillor Anderson has given advice to the applicant and so has recused himself from this item. On that basis, Stephen, let's proceed.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Stephen Wilkinson. I'm the case officer for this planning application. It relates to the demolition of existing building and the construction of a new replacement timber refectory building at Craghouse Farm in Cuckridge. And it's brought before a panel as it's situated in the green belt and it's considered to constitute a departure from the development plan. And just to let you know, the applicant and the agent are on hand today to answer any questions. If you have any afterwards, they can come over to the table if you wish. So first slide, please. So towards the centre of the plan there, you can see a small red line boundary, and then you've got the wider blue line boundary, which is the other land in the ownership of the applicant. So you can see the actual application site forms a small part of a wider land holding, which encompasses the collection of farm buildings and the wider agricultural land. And there's also the long access that we came up on the site visit today from Otley Old Road, which takes you to the car park to the front of the nursery. Next slide, please. So this is an aerial photo. The red dotted area there shows the existing buildings which are to be demolished. So there's a collection of 5 or 6 buildings there, and it shows you the context of those buildings in relation to the wider Craghouse farm site. There's where the red dots are, it's a collection of single-storey structures which are generally in a poor state of repair. And then just to give you some context about the wider site, so it's obviously run by the Caring for Life charity, and they support homeless, vulnerable and at-risk adults. And this Craghouse farm site is used as a base for a lot of the charitable activities they do. And these include a range of like therapeutic activities such as working with animals, wood, plant conservation area, and they also have a catering academy as well. And the existing refectory buildings are rarely used as like the meetup area. And when we went on site today, it showed it was going to be set up for the lunchtime meals for these people that they help on the wider site. So it's ancillary to those like adult learning centre uses. You can also see the cluster of trees just to the side and rear of the site, which we saw today, and Craghouse Farm to the it's not orientated northeast, north-south here, so it's just to the right-hand side there. That's grade 2 listed. Next slide, please. This just sets the wider context of a range of uses on site. I won't go into too much detail on this, but there's a range of uses on the site. A lot relate to the adult learning centre uses. You've got a few commercial uses in terms of a plant nursery, a cafe and a restaurant and a farm shop. There's a couple of residential units, and then you've got a wider agricultural uses as well. Next slide, please. These are the existing buildings. So the existing refectory buildings at the top are just green painted timber with a corrugated roof. I suppose at the time they were intended to have a temporary lifespan. They've kind of outlived that, and in quite a poor state of repair. You can see some accessibility issues with the ramps and stuff there. And then you've got a series of storage containers towards the bottom of the site. Next slide, please. And this is the view. This is probably the clearest view you get. You don't tend to get wider views of the site, but this is from the access towards the car park. It just shows you the scale and size of those buildings and the relationship to the trees. And just down the left-hand side, there's the access to the like commercial elements, I suppose, of a wider farm complex. And next slide, please. Now, this is just a comparison of the footprints of the existing on the left. So you've got 6 buildings there, 6 separate buildings. A lot of them are interlinked. and the new proposal on the right hand side there. So as you can see, the new building's been pulled slightly further away from the trees, but it is larger in footprint cumulatively than what it's replacing. Next slide, please. And this is showing you a floor plan of the building. So if we just go from top to bottom, there's an access. Sorry, there's an entrance porch, some toilets, and then the key part is like a large dining space. Then you've got kitchen and office areas and a food storage area to the south. And you can see the green trees on the plan there. That's proposed new planting. So as part of this scheme, the applicants are proposing significant new tree planting to expand that existing cluster to the north and east. Next plan, please. This is the elevations of the existing buildings. Next slide, please. Then this is what's proposed. So it's a single story structure constructed of timber with a metal sheet roof, and we think that the form and size of the building is not out of keeping with the agricultural context of the wider sites. Can we have a next slide, please? These are some 3D mock-ups. So these don't show the proposed new tree planting, but they give you an appreciation of what the building might look like. So if you can just go through the next few, Toby, and just leave a little gap. Yeah, thank you. So you'll note from the report that the key planning issue is to do with the green belt, and that the reason it's coming to panel is because the replacement building is materially larger than the ones it replaces. And given this, it doesn't meet any of the green belt exceptions outlined within the MPPF, and as a consequence is considered to constitute inappropriate development. Now, within the report, we acknowledge that the larger building will cause some green belt harm due to its increased footprint and height. And when we identify greenbelt harm, it needs to be clearly outweighed by any very special circumstances. So I've detailed the very special circumstances in paragraph 77 of the report, and they mainly revolve around a functional need for the building to meet the needs of the users of the site. There's also environmental improvements, because as you can gather from those pictures, this new building is going to be a significant improvement environmentally compared to what's there existing. There'll also be a visual aspect uplift in that regard, and there's also going to be improvements for access, so, like disabled access functionality of the buildings as well. So the conclusion we've come to in this regard is that in this instance we think the very special circumstances do outweigh the moderate harm we've identified to the green belt. So we recommend approval subject to the conditions that are specified at the start of the report.
Thanks very much, Stephen. That's concise. Fantastic. Questions, colleagues? Do any? I thought on the proposals, from my point as chair, I think it's a really handsome building, really appropriate. I like the design structure and everything. So yeah, so I'm content, as it were. Put it. Oh, Councillor Reagan. Yep.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent improvement to what's there now, and I think it's a really good use of an area to implement and include people that are vulnerable and young people. I know that's not a material consideration, but I think we just need to positively support this.
I wholeheartedly agree. Councillor Smith.
I was just going to say, as much as I don't like building in the green belt, I don't think this development will do anything like the harm that long road leading in will have done. And I also don't think that it would do any harm compared to what is already there. I think this will be a vast improvement overall, because it'll be more efficient, it'll be more suited to its needs. And well, I know it's a comment, but yeah, I'm happy with this. Thank you.
we have sashayed neatly into comments, which is absolutely fine because I don't think there's any burning question for us. I think we're all very content with this. In that case, should we move to the recommendations? Can anyone move? Councillor? Yep.
I will propose.
And,
I think Councillor Smith might have been just picked.
well, I think, and we have some controversy. I tell you what, Councillor Smith can move it, Councillor Riggins.
I never move anything.
So, let's let Councillor Smith move these recommendations.
We definitely know that, Councillor Smith.
Now, so Councillor Smith has moved the recommendations. Councillor Regan has seconded them. What did I say? Did she read? Oh, good grief. Honestly, today. Sorry, Denise. I swear. Can we show our hands in favour? Anyone against? Any abstentions? Is Councillor Finnegan voting at all on this? So it's quite all right. No, undoubtedly so, yes. So that's unanimous in favour. Thank you very much, colleagues. That was short and sweet. So we now move on to item 10. Now, this is the one we spoke to at the start of the meeting because I have, on behalf of all three Headingley Ward councillors, Headingley High Pot Ward councillors, written in support of the application.
Yeah,
we're going to bring back Councillor Anderson. Yeah. Now. Shh, Councillor Anderson's back. Stop talking about him. Right, more seriously, you ribald bunch. This is the item, so I've spoken in favour of the application, so I'm going to recuse myself from the chair for this item. So we need an august colleague to be voted in. We got Councillor Anderson moved. Anyone going to second Councillor Anderson? Councillor Heselwood proposed. Seconded. Vote in favour of hands of Councillor Heselwood. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm really sorry. Yeah, we need to, as a point of order, there was someone that was moved to ask for Councillor Anderson to chair. I don't think we went to the vote for that. We went straight to an alternative motion.
I just didn't see anyone seconded him. I'm really so. Oh, okay, Councillor. In the interests of propriety, as our legal officer has rightly pointed out, can we have a show of hands in favour of Councillor Anderson chairing this last item? You can vote for yourself, Councillor Anderson. Yes, 3. Anyone against that? Right. Somebody propose another member, please. Yeah, we just need to do it again, Councillor Reagan. Right, can we have a show of hands in favour of Councillor Hazelwood? The propriety of democracy is served. Right, give us a second, folks, while we rearrange ourselves.
Okay, colleagues, are we okay to proceed with the last item on the agenda? Okay, so agenda item 10, and we will start with the officer's report. So over to yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to the proposals at Headingley Community Centre. Just before I start, there's just a quick update. Since the report was published, we've received one further representation, and that was a general comment, and it was only very short, so I'll just read it out verbatim. The comment said, maybe time to offer this out to the market for an interested community focused business again, someone who would keep the existing shape and features of the building. Right, before I start, the application's brought to panel because we received the referral request, which was jointly from councillors Walshaw, Garthwaite and Pryor, and the reasons for this are covered in paragraph 1 of the report. And I'd also like to say the Conservation Officer is here today to offer any specialist advice if you'd like to draw on that. So the proposal relates to change of use of a former community centre to an apart hotel. The works include an extension over the existing boiler room, a roof replacement including dormer windows, various fenestration changes and reconfiguration and subdivision of a service yard. No off-street parking is proposed as part of the proposals. Next slide, please. So this is just a very small location plan. So the red line boundary shows that the site of the former community centre, and you can see the blue line plan to the small blue line boundary to the side. So that's 38 Bennett Road, which is also in the applicant's ownership as well. So the site's mainly the existing building and a very small service yard just to the north, which is the clear area there. Next slide, please. And this is just a clearer picture of that, but it also shows the subdivision of the service yard, because the adjoining 38 Bennett Road, which is in use as 2 apartments, needs some like bin storage and other amenity space as well. Next slide, please. So this just gives you a bit of context for the location of the site. So it's a very prominent location on the corner of North Lane in Headingley and Bennett Road, which goes to the right hand side there. And it's a currently vacant building, and you can see just to the top of that image there, there's the Headingley Taps public house, its car park, and to the left hand side is a former lounge cinema, and the Arc pub extends that way as well. It's located, the site's located within Headingley Town Centre. It's also within a conservation area, and the Taps, Headingley Taps Lodge, gate piers and boundary wall to the top of the image there are listed buildings. Next image, please. So this is a picture of the existing building. So it's of 2-storey domestic scale. It displays arts and crafts detailing. It's got Crittall style windows. It's got a distinctive curved roof, and the building turns a corner in the road. And you can also see its relationship with the highway. So it directly abuts the highway, and just on the left hand side there, you've got the Pelican Crossing, which goes across from the Arc towards this building. Next slide, please. And this is just looking a bit further away on North Lane. So you can see the character on the right hand side. It's commercial in nature down there, with some single story elements, and you've got the 2-storey building which is in question here, and on the other side of the road you've got commercial elements again, but those buildings are of a different style. Next slide, please. And this is an image from the Taps car park looking at the side. Well, I think it's detailed the rear on the plans of the building. So the building in question is, you can see that gable there. So the building appears 2-storey, and it's got the brick gable with that chimney. And the listed lodge I was talking about is in the right hand side of this picture here. So you can see the relationship between the 2 buildings. And the building on the left hand side is the 38 Bennett Road, which is also in the applicant's ownership, but not part of this application. Next slide, please. This is just the existing plans. I worked well on these because I think the pictures are better in that regard. Next slide, please. So this is the floor plan of the proposal. So the proposal is for 8 apart hotel rooms. There's also a conference room in the bottom left-hand picture. There's the ground floor plan. So the room that's coloured in green, the left-hand side of that is for a conference room. And then just wanted to point out there's 2 bedrooms at ground floor level. So these are the ones adjacent to the Pelican crossing that I pointed out before. So if you look there, they're kind of detailed. So they've got a bed and some living accommodation, and those beds are laid out adjacent to those windows. Then there's accommodation at first floor, and what this proposal's doing as well is also going into the roof space of the existing building, and we'll see that on the next plan. Next plan, please. So this is the top image is what the development's going to look like from the TAPS car park. So I showed you that picture of the brick gable and the chimney, and the top image shows you what the resultant development will look like following this proposal. So the chimney will be lost, and the brick gable will be replaced with with render, and then you've got the mansard roof as well. And what you've got here is the existing building's 2-story in scale, and you can see it creates a 3-story mass with the windows going up there. And at the bottom image, so this is the North Lane elevation. So this is the one where if you were crossing over the road at the Pelican crossing, this is what you'd be looking at. So some key elements to point out there is for changing the roof of the building. So you can see the steepness on the top image of this mansard roof with the dormers, and then there's 8 dormers in total proposed. You'll see the others in a minute. The windows are being redesigned and reproportioned, and that includes dropping the sill level. So the existing sills are being dropped to near pavement level almost. And can we go on to the next slide, please? The Bennett Road elevation shows it in conjunction with the flats next door, and similarly here, that all the windows have been replaced with these new style windows which have a horizontal emphasis, and then you've got additional dormer windows there, and a new doorway has been proposed on the bottom there in between the right hand windows. And then the bottom image shows if you were looking at it from corner on, and shows you the new entrance to the building. You can see there's a Juliet style element at first floor level, and a dormer on that corner. Can we have the next slide, please? And this is a 3D image that the applicants have provided. So I just need to caveat this by saying this is one that was put in when the application was first submitted, but there's only been very small changes, which included a slight reduction in the height since then. But it does give you a good overview of the style of the new development, and what's envisaged for the site. So as you can see, the new building would have a contemporary appearance, and it's got these dark window reveals. And almost given the extent of the changes proposed, it'll almost appear as a new building compared to what's there as existing. If we go on to the next slide, please. These are some historic images. So the top one shows a picture of when it was used as a police station. It was actually a brick building back then. And then you can see from the image below, which is from 1931, the building was rendered there. And the fabric of the building's largely the same as what it was then in 1931. And if you go on to the next image, this is just from the middle of the 20th century. And again, a lot of that character remains as existing, as you'll have seen from those photos. Now that it has been vandalized, the building, there is some graffiti, and there are some windows that need replacing, but these are superficial in a way to the inherent character. So moving on to the key planning issues, you'll note from the officer report that the principle of the apart hotel use is considered acceptable. And then the apart hotel is, it's within the C1 hotels use class. They're differing away in so far as they have more facilities associated with an apartment, such as a separate living room and cooking facilities, and they can also be accommodated for longer periods of time. So we usually allow them up to 3 months occupancy in such uses. But given the town centre location, we think that the principle of the use is fine. But from the report, you'll note we've got 2 key issues, which are the heritage impacts and the impacts on the amenity of the occupiers of these hotel rooms. So firstly, it's probably better, Toby, if we go back to one of the pictures of the site whilst I'm talking through this. Actually, can we go back to the proposed elevations? I'll just get you a number. Number 80 will do. Yeah, thank you. So in terms of the heritage impacts, I mean, the site's within a sensitive location from a heritage point of view. It's considered to be a positive building in the conservation area, and it also sits very close to several listed buildings and structures. And as I pointed out, whilst there is some graffiti and damage, these are largely superficial. So we think the key harm from the proposal is from the new roof form. So the building's effectively having a new roof, and it's a steep-sided mansard roof with the addition of these 8 dormers, which largely dominate that roof line. We also think the new fenestration, which is removing the crittle style windows, which are a key part of the existing character, and inserting these new style windows, is out of keeping. And also the rear elevation, which is the top elevation there, we think that the loss of the brick 2-story gable and the chimney, creating an almost 3-story elevation, is detrimental to the character of the building as well. And overall, the building's going for like an Art Deco style, and we don't think that this is sympathetic to the existing building. And that the proposed changes, the scale of the actual works that are required for this use, effectively mean that not much of the character of the existing buildings can be retained, and it's almost akin to a new building. So overall, we think that this harm to the conservation area is less than substantial, looking at the government, the MPPF tests, but nevertheless, that's still significant harm. And as I've set out in paragraph 64, where there is harm, where harm is considered to constitute less than substantial harm to the significance of a heritage asset, this should be weighed against the public benefits of the scheme. Now, in this instance, there are public benefits. The building's been vacant, and it will create a use of this for this building. And I've outlined the other public benefits in paragraph 65. But we think that this application is going to result in significant harm to the heritage assets. And whilst we support the reuse of the building, we don't think this can be at any cost. So in this instance, we think there'll be considerable harm, and those public benefits, whilst they're noted, won't outweigh that harm. And then the second issue is in relation to amenity. So you're going to have people accommodating these ground floor apart hotel rooms. And can we go back a couple of pictures to the one showing the Pelican Crossing, Toby? Just a couple more. That one there. Yeah. So there's going to be a couple of hotel rooms on the left-hand side of that building there at ground floor, and this is one of the busiest parts of Headingley. There's no buffer away from the narrow pavement there, and it's busy into the early hours of the morning because of its close proximity to the arc and the taps. We just think the layout with the bedrooms close up to those windows, it's going to require blinds and curtains to be drawn constantly. They're going to have no outlook from there. And it'll also be noisy. Whilst triple glazing is proposed, we don't really have any reports or anything that would indicate that this would be an acceptable level of mitigation in that regard. So So the use of those ground floor rooms as accommodation gives rise to the second reason for refusal. And there's also the potential for the occupants to occupy the rooms for longer than the typical hotel use as well. So, you know, the level of amenity in those rooms we need to give consideration to. So overall, we think it would also result in a poor standard of living for the people within those rooms. So I've set out 2 reasons for refusal in the report, which relate to the impact on the conservation area listed buildings and street scene, as well as the impact on the occupiers of the room. And as such, we're recommending that the application is refused.
Okay, thank you. Because officers are recommending refusal, we do have the applicant here to speak against that refusal. So I'm going to hand over to Alexander Ball. Am I right? Yep. All right. Right, you're doing it together. Okay, no problem. You have 4 minutes. Am I right? Thinking, yep. 4 minutes between you. Yeah. Yeah, 4 minutes between you, yeah. Okay. Okay, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. The proposed development represents an opportunity to preserve a long-term vacant building by providing an economically sustainable use and enhance its appearance and the appearance of the wider conservation area. The scheme has been heritage-led from its inception, supported by input from a highly experienced heritage consultant, and with full regard to the heritage significance of the building and its role in the historic environment. Whilst we accept that the building has some heritage significance, it is considered that its value is low due to the many alterations that resulted in a weak architectural expression, and it's also worth noting that the property is not listed. The heritage statement found that the proposed alterations to the roof equate to no changed impact, as it will retain the important attributes of the existing roof. In addition, the height of the refurbished roof has been lowered to that of the existing. I would also like to point out that during pre-application stage, the applicant engaged with the council, and following the feedback, numerous changes were made, notably the reduction in scale of the proposal that was initially 4-story high. The minor interventions in the elevations are considered to have a moderate beneficial impact on the surrounding heritage assets by straightening the Art Deco design. We consider that officers' objections to the proposed alterations to a medical and much altered building are overly conservative and in denial of the definition of conservation. Instead, we consider the design to have a positive impact, bringing a building back to life and significantly enhancing the street scene, the conservation area, and the nearby listed buildings. With regard to the second reason for refusal, we consider this to be highly unreasonable position for officers to take. At no point we were asked to provide a noise assessment, so officers had no evidence on which to base the reasoning. Our view is that the use of triple glazed windows to mitigate external noise, blinds that allow natural light, and mechanical ventilation to control the temperature of the rooms provide a high level of amenity sufficient for the ground floor accommodation. Thank you.
Dear Chair and members, I have lived and worked in Headingley for a number of years, and when the opportunity finally arose, I purchased the former community centre with the hope of transforming it into something that will truly benefit the local area and complement its surroundings. Being aware of its heritage, setting and history, I approached the refurbishment plans with care and appointed a team of experts to ensure the highest quality outcome. This included an experienced heritage professional who was a founding member of the Institute of Historic Building Conservation. As Maria outlined, we have considered various redevelopment options at the pre-application stage and made numerous changes following feedback from the council. As you may have noticed at your site visit earlier today, there are other buildings on North Lane that have undergone extensive refurbishment over the years, notably the former lounge cinema located just across the road. Since its construction, the building has accommodated a number of uses, but the more recent attempts to turn it into a restaurant and community enterprise support centre have failed. This has resulted in the site being vacant for over a decade. Therefore, it is important that the new use of the property thrives at this location, and apart hotels are increasingly popular with today's lifestyle. Our apart hotel will provide an alternative to Airbnbs that have proven to have a devastating impact on many communities by reducing affordable housing options and creating higher average rents. The apart hotel sector is one of the fastest growing segments in the overall accommodation market, and town centres are a prime location for hotels. In addition, prior to the submission of our proposals, I personally spoke with the owners of adjacent businesses who expressed their support for our proposal and their relief that someone was finally doing something about that eyesore. We also intend to use local produce as part of our offering, which will benefit the locality even further. We strongly believe that the proposed refusal will prevent inappropriate new use of the building and represents an unreasonable and inflexible approach. By approving our proposal today, you allow us to give the former Headingley Community Centre a new lease of life and to benefit the wider Headingley community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, questions to the applicant. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you. I would like to ask you, why would you change the windows, make them lower on nearer to the pavement rather than keep them where they are at this moment in time? Also, via the crossing, why wouldn't you make that a conference room rather than a bedroom? Because it's right next to the crossing. And you mentioned that the roof would be lower, but looking at it, it looks as if it's raised with those, what they call them, dormers, with those dormers. So how is it lowered if it's going to have dormers? And also just to ask you about pick up and drop off. Have you looked at a pick up and drop off point, and where would that be? Those are just my questions. Thanks.
Thank you. To start with the sill heights first and foremost, our plan is actually to restore the sill heights, their original height back when it was first built and was a police station. So unfortunately, you weren't able to go inside the building today, but if you did, you'd see that they've been bricked up and the original sill heights were much lower. So our plan is to sort of enhance that initial design of the building rather than sort of further what we think is sort of poor design changes throughout the years. The next question, I think, was regarding the roof height. Now, again, our application proposes to maintain the same roof height. So we're making no change to the overall height of the building, but we do need to change the design of the roof structure just to allow for that third story. Again, if you went inside today, you would have seen there's ample room within the building to do so, but it just means there's some minimal changes to be made to the roof structure to make that happen. Pick up and drop off point. Again, I mean, this building was in use as a community centre. There was a previous approved application for a restaurant, all of which would have a much greater requirement for servicing than what we're proposing. So yeah, we have looked at it. We want to use external contractors to use a pick up and drop off point at the service yard. And it's something we need to give careful consideration to, but Highways had no objection when we submitted our application.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions to the applicant? Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Couple of things. Go back to the pick up and drop off point into the service yard. There won't be much space in that service yard because you're going to have to put your waste in there and things, aren't you? So how do you imagine that's going to work? The other thing was, why would you want to change the roof line so fundamentally on such an iconic building? I mean, it's stood like that for over 100 years. You know, it's a real heritage asset, and it's a beautiful roof. It was one of the first things that struck me. So I just like to understand why you'd like to change it so fundamentally. I mean, the obvious one is you need to get bedrooms up there, but you know, why? You know, is there any other way of doing it?
I'll take the question about the service arrangement. So obviously, as the applicant mentioned, the site actually had a consent for restaurant, and the service area has space for a vehicle for the gate to open, a vehicle to reverse to it. But however, we understand that it's quite tight. So for example, we incorporated a few ways of reducing servicing time. So for example, doing laundry on site, and for the bins, it's not actually emptying the bins, it's exchange of the bins, which takes less time, and that's only bi-weekly. So basically try to do that a bit less. But what we're trying to say that we also can make other arrangements because there is ample space within a pub next door. However, like mentioned before, highways didn't have any problem with the vehicle during servicing time, reversing to the gate and the gate automatically opening and taking the bins. It's just a smaller facilities. If this will work for a restaurant, it will definitely work for Apart Hotel. Hence, we didn't receive an objection on servicing grounds. We have also submitted a more detailed service management plan that tells you a bit more how we're going to do all the deliveries, whether it's any hamper baskets for the guests staying, laundry, how we're going to deal with all that. More than happy to provide a copy as well of that, but that's part of the submission. Thank you.
If I can answer your question about the roof structure, first and foremost, you're right, it's to make the building commercially viable with our proposal. We do need that amount of rooms in there. Initially, we put in for pre-application and we had an additional story on there, which we've since removed and just lowered the building altogether. But basically to make it commercially viable, it is in a serious state of disrepair. And yeah, we think the dormers are a welcome and attractive addition.
Okay, Councillor Hamilton, you want to come back? Yeah.
You didn't answer the question with regards to the bedroom by the Pelican Crossing. You know, would you consider having a conference room there rather than a bedroom?
My apologies, sorry. Yeah, absolutely. We made it clear we've been more than willing to compromise and make changes and to make this project work. And moving the conference room from one side to another is not a problem whatsoever. We're more than happy to look into that. My only not concern, but there's been no, as Maria stressed, we've never been asked. There's been no noise assessment. There's nothing to evidence that any sound or any noise pollution coming from that Pelican Crossing would cause a lack of amenity for the residents of the hotel. Yeah, and as you know, well, we're happy to move it in basically is what I'm trying to get across. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any more questions for the applicant?
I'd like to ask one, Chair.
Oh, Mr. Butler.
Sorry, I rarely do this, but Mr. Bell made reference to taking the windows back to how they were when it was a police station. So if Toby could just go to page 83 to show plate 30, please. Toby. Page 83, thank you. Obviously, there's a banding detail there that goes underneath the windows when it was a police station, but you're saying that originally the building had the windows all the way down. So you reckon it's modified in plate 30 already? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, sorry, I'm suggesting that banding detail is at floor height on the first floor. So the windows now, if you can see, it's quite a lot higher than the banding detail.
Yeah, well, sorry, I'm asking the question for clarity for members because the implication from the original answer was that the ground floor windows were being taken down to what was the original because you said there was brickwork behind. So I just wanted to clarify that. So actually, it's not strictly correct, that is it? Because the ground floor windows were significantly higher as it's shown on plate 30 when it was a police station.
Sorry, yeah, my point was referring to the first floor windows.
That's okay. I just wanted to make it clear.
There are, however, the doors that have been changed on the ground floor, which obviously they were at ground level.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to make it clear for members that we were only referring to the first floor. Yeah, but the ground floor, it is actually as was. Thank you.
Yeah, you want to come in? Yeah.
Can I just come in on that? If we go back to the historic photograph, you can see that it's the windows on the corner that are dropped to the sill band, not on the rest of the elevation on North Lane. Can you make that distinction out?
Okay. Everyone okay with that? Okay, any more questions to the applicant then? Councillor Smith.
Sorry, I'd just like clarification, please. So when we were on site this morning, we were under the impression that all windows up the first floor and the ground floor were going to be brought down. Which windows do you propose to bring down, please?
Our proposal that we submitted was for all the window levels to be reduced. However, we're more than happy to maintain the existing sill heights of the ground floor, which we have stressed previously.
Look on here, Chair.
Apologies, sorry, we're just having a look at your diagrams to determine that.
If you look on here, it's there.
Ah, right. Okay, is that it for questions to the applicant? Yep. Okay, thank you. So now we've got questions to officers. Okay, so all right, I've got Councillor Smith and Councillor Finnegan.
Thank you. One for the conservation officer and one for the highways officer, please. So the conservation officer, obviously this is a heritage asset. It's a very prominent building. What are your thoughts from a conservation point of view with the massing and complete change of the roof line of this building, please? Thank you.
My advice has been that the alterations to the roof form are harmful to the character and appearance of the positive building in the conservation area. The domestic scale of the building and its prominent roof form are key parts of its character, and the roof alterations are in effect an additional story with an inappropriate roof form. The mansard form is very different from what's there at the moment, and the dormer windows will be very prominent. With this being a corner plot, it's the end point of views from North Lane, so it's very prominent, and so those changes will be visible from quite a distance.
And the highways officer, the proposed service arrangements, given the very busy road, the very narrow pavement, and the proximity of the Pelican Crossing, how do you see that working, please?
Sorry. Woke everybody up now, including me. The building's an apart hotel with no staff there. It requires a minimal amount of servicing, which, you know, given that it's going to empty bins fortnightly, effectively, then we would think that that would be acceptable from the service yard at the back.
Okay, Councillor Finnegan.
The applicant says conservation are in denial. Are you? And the other issue is, and this is a continuing debate. It's been empty for 10 years at this particular point. And the winner they always have with conservation buildings is that we hold out and hold out and hold out to a point where someone wangs in a firebomb or whatever it might actually be, and the whole thing goes up. And I'm curious to understand conservation's point of view at what point do we start to be relatively flexible for the building, which is in a poor state, collapses in on itself at that particular point, and there is nothing left to conserve. And that's an interesting discussion. We certainly have that debate in our neck of the woods about the whole thing. At what point do we say 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? If nothing happens, we just hope that it's actually standing in 40 years' time with no maintenance or whatever. I'm curious to try and understand the principle better.
I'm definitely looking for the building to be brought back into use. My understanding is that the lack of use is not down to the character of the building. It's to do with other issues of ownership in the past. The building has had previous approvals on it, which just haven't been developed, but that is not to do with the limitations of the building. That's more to do with ownership. In terms of whether we're in denial or not, I think one of the problems with the proposal is that it's seeking to impose an Art Deco character onto a building that doesn't have an Art Deco character or appearance. In the applicant's heritage statement on page 32, their heritage specialist actually states the altered building displays no strong architectural features of the Art Deco style. So my recommendation would be to work with the existing character of the building. So the Victorian police station and library that you saw on the historic photos, although the carcass of that building's there, its character and appearance relates to the 1930s modernisation, redevelopment. But that has positive character, but it's not an Art Deco character. So my recommendation would be to work with the distinctive character of the existing positive building and not think that because it was modernised in the 30s, it must be Art Deco. It doesn't have Art Deco features. So to impose that character onto it, I think is the wrong approach.
Can I just come in on one point?
I'll just bring Councillor Finnegan in and then yourself. Yeah.
We can develop that a bit further because I know conservation would love it to be, you know, lovely and flowery and cuddly and all the rest of it at this particular point. But in terms of using a building for commercial use, clearly if other things have been tried and if the ward members are to be believed, it's a bit of an eyesore of a site. Do you feel we want to retain that sort of level of purity in terms of conservation at a point where nobody believes it's a building that they're prepared to invest in because they can't get anything out of it? In which case, you know, is that a sustainable future for the building, the conservation area?
We haven't had any evidence to suggest that the building couldn't have a different use. There's been no presentation of an optimum viable use case. So that means that what's proposed is the best case scenario. That case hasn't been put forward to justify the harm being proposed. I think the building's highly convertible. The area doesn't have vacancies. It doesn't have that problem. It's a vibrant area. I don't think the problem has been with the building. I think the problem's been with the ownership in the past.
Okay, I'm just bringing Stephen and then I'll bring you.
Sorry, Chair. I mean, Kate almost said what I was about to say. The Councillor Finnegan start to that question, the implication, because what he said was how long would the conservation wait before we could be relatively flexible? The implication being that it's the council officers that have not been flexible and therefore have hampered the reuse of this building for the last 10 years. That's not the case. That's nothing to do with the council's officers and previous suggestions. We don't know what the issue is there. But then Kate did actually answer the question by saying that we don't think this is an optimum solution. We are quite happy with the principle of an apart hotel, but the effective damage from our perspective to the building is just unacceptable in terms of what you're doing to it. So I think it's not a question of being relatively flexible. It's just that there are very significant alterations to the building that still does retain some of its original character.
Yeah, all I was going to add is, you know, the headline point is that it's been vacant for 10 years, but I think when you look a bit closer than that, I don't think we've got any evidence it's been marketed for a significant amount of time within those 10 years. And I don't know the full details, but for some reason or not, it's not been available for a significant amount of time. And I'm not sure how long it was on the market before the current applicant picked it up, but it's a town centre location in a very successful centre in North Leeds. Could be used for a variety of uses. And as Kate said, when we're looking at less than substantial harm, we've also got to look at the optimum viable use, and we haven't had any information in terms of that. And that could also look at the number of bedrooms proposed as well. And we don't have that information as to whether that level of intervention is required to make the scheme viable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Councillor Hamilton.
Can I just ask, we went on a site visit today and we only look at the outside, the appearance. Why didn't we have access to the inside? So, you know, we can look, sometimes we get a better idea of what it would be like with regards to the rooms, etc. So can I just ask you why we weren't able to go inside?
Yeah, I mean, it's standard practice on these, like these panel visits, that we generally look externally at the buildings. I mean, in terms of the internal fabric, we'd usually look at specialist documents looking at the condition of buildings and things like that. But I mean, in terms of your appreciation of the internal elements, we're generally looking at the external impact in relation to this.
The external impact, as far as I can see in these papers, is retaining it as it is by the conservation. But it's about a part hotel, it's called, you know, just to get a view of the upstairs, etc. And we do normally go inside buildings when we go on site visit, so we can see and suggest what can be retained. You know, that's our suggestion, what can be retained. And we'll say the roof is high and it's got a beautiful decor, etc. Is that going to be retained, etc.? So we only look today on the outside, you know, for the conservation area. We didn't get to go inside to see if they're saying about 8 bedrooms or 6 bedrooms. That's why I ask, would they move the bedroom from the Pelican Crossing and make that the conference room? So I would just want to know why we didn't get to go in.
Hamilton, through the chair, yes, officers have not asked for internal access. I don't think we're too worried about the interior, because actually it's not a listed building, but it is a building of note within the area. And so from our perspective, the external alterations are significant enough for us to consider it warrants the refusal, because it is quite a significant intervention with the alterations to the roof and the changes to the window designs and all the rest of it. So we haven't asked for it, but then again, the internal alterations, I don't think we'd be too worried about, because I'm not sure there's that much internally that we would concern ourselves, and it's not listed.
Yeah, I think that's the issue, that it's not a listed building, but it's in a conservation area. So the external appearance needs to be in keeping with the area. I think that's the issue with the internal inspection. Any more questions to officers? Councillor Bowden.
Yeah, why wasn't there a noise assessment been done in regards to if there is triple glazing and the noise levels?
Yeah, in terms of the assessments like that, they're led by the applicant submitting those assessments to you know, to prove they can mitigate any issues, I suppose. So in terms of this, we've made a judgment that we think that juxtaposition of the rooms in the building, you know, we haven't got any evidence basically that would tell us it would be acceptable, and we have got concerns there, and we don't think they can be mitigated just by triple glazing, because that causes other, you know, amenities are a wide-ranging subject, and noise is just part of it, and then you've got outlook, sun, you know, penetration, and all you know, sunlight and other issues such as that as well. So you know, in the absence of a noise survey, I mean, we wouldn't usually ask for a noise survey up front for something like this, but it's, you know, it's up to the applicants to prove that it's not going to be an issue, and all we've got is that it's going to be triple glazing, and we can't take that at face value really and say that's going to mitigate all the noise harm, because whilst that part of Headingley is busy, we don't have any noise studies or anything to indicate the level.
Okay, Councillor Anderson.
On that point, I asked that question at the beginning of the meeting, as those remember, and Mr. Carr assured me that this would be done automatically nowadays without any, I mean, and we're at the first hurdle, we've now proved that it's not being done automatically. I mean, that was the specific question I asked, and I was assured by Mr. Carr that this was going to be done automatically from now on, and now we've just got an application that says it's not being done automatically.
Well, just to clarify, obviously it happens where we want consultation responses from environmental health. In this instance, as the officers just explained, we didn't actually seek it because it wasn't required for us to be able to consider the application, because there are fundamental issues with the location of the site beyond just noise, as he explained. We
Well,
wouldn't have asked for it in this
Sorry,
particular case.
but my understanding was one of the issues was the location of the crossing and also the other activities that may or may not be happening in close proximity to this in terms of the arc and the various other local, well, let's be quite frank, the taps are within, 10 yards, 10 feet of it. I mean, it would have to be a consideration to me. If someone was wanting to live there, not live there, stay there, they would have concerns about the noise levels as to whether or not their sleep is or is not going to be disturbed. And if it's not going to be disturbed, then that's, to me, to the benefit of the applicants to show that it wouldn't be detrimentally affected. But my understanding of what was said on site today was that that was one of the concerns, was the proximity to the crossing and also the additional nighttime life that goes on in and around that site.
Would any of the officers like to come back on that? Oh, just 1 second.
We're just looking back at some of the information, and I mean, the primary issue with this is obviously the impact on the building. I almost call it listed then. The impact on the building by the alterations. So the secondary reasons for refusal obviously is on the amenity issues. But what I would say, we're just looking at the emails here, because isn't technology wonderful that you can pull it up? But going back to Monday, the 14th of March, 2022, where we did actually go back to the applicants. This is Steve speaking. I have previously also raised amenity concerns for users of ground floor rooms adjacent to North Lane, especially near the Pelican Crossing. I feel that the juxtaposition could be improved by locating the seating, living room areas and roadside rooms with the bedroom set back into rooms where possible, and the existing layout requires further justification. Now, Steve will correct me if I'm wrong, but previously my understanding is the applicant has been reluctant, excepting today when they did talk about moving the conference room and changing the height of windows to the ground floor, have actually basically been saying no to that and not being prepared to do it. So Steve, is that correct?
Okay, can I ask the applicant, are you prepared to do that?
Yes, absolutely. And we'd also happily get noise test done as well. We've never once been asked for that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Sorry, again, just to intervene. So just to clarify this, as I often try to do. So if members were prepared, were minded to ask for further information on whether the amenity of the resident, potential residents could be protected, members could obviously go for a deferral for that information to be sought, because you've heard about deferrals today anyway, and many of you obviously have seen it in action before, but it still leaves us with the primary consideration and reason for refusal, which is the impact upon the building. So the other option is to simply defer it, go for further information, see whether you're satisfied with that. If you're comfortable with the alterations to the building, that's the first problem. But if you're not comfortable with the alterations to the building, you could the application could be reviewed on the basis of these two reasons for refusal. Of course, ultimately, it'd be up to officers to justify those at appeal if that's where we ended up, or we could proceed on the basis if somebody wanted to move it, to refuse it on the basis of the impact on the listed building and remove the secondary reason for refusal. Sorry, on the building rather. I knew I'd do that. We could continue with the reasons for refusal on the impact upon the building and remove the secondary reason for refusal, which is the impact upon the amenity. So effectively, there's three options. We could deal with it as it is at the moment. We could ask for further information, accepting that the design's okay, and we ask for further information to justify the location of the bedrooms and amenity, and potential amendments has been suggested by Mr. Bell, or it could be taken forward for the refusal on the basis of the impact upon the building and remove the secondary reason for refusal, which is the amenity problem.
Okay, I could see Councillor Hamilton and Councillor.
Sorry, Chair, can I just build on the points that Steve has kindly made? There are three complicated options that you've got before you. I just don't want you to lose sight of the fact that you've got a legal duty under section 72 and 66 in relation to this asset I know it's not a listed building, but also the conservation area in which it sits and the clear comments that have been made from the conservation officer. Now, if you are of the view that you need some further information in light of what the applicant has said about making amendments and whether you wish to see that in order to discharge that legal duty, then that sits with a deferral for that further information. I just want to highlight that.
I know you want to come in, Councillor Hamilton, but I think Councillor Reagan's going to indicating she wants to follow up on that point. Sorry.
On that point, when the conservation officer was saying about not happy with the design of the roof, would the applicant be willing to alter the dormers into a Velux type of window that isn't as prominent?
We'd be happy to alter the dormers in style, but what we can't do, and which we've discussed previously, is change the number of dormers. That, in my mind, would just create a very ugly looking building. But yes, we're happy to make changes to the overall style of the dormers.
Councillor Hamilton.
No, I was just going to say if the applicant would be happy to work with the conservation officer with regards to how they would envisage the building by retaining it better. You know, that's what I want. I mean, obviously you say, yes, you would move the bedroom, etc. and all these, but just to, if we defer, you know, I would like to know, would you be willing to work with the conservation officer and come up with what they believe would be suitable and fitting in the area without the dominance of the roof, etc., that is being pointed out to us today.
Mr. Bell, do you want to come back on that?
Sorry, can I answer on behalf of my client? So, members, I would just like to say that isn't part of the officer's report. We had organised a workshop to work with the officers and a conservation officer. Unfortunately, conservation officer, she was unable to attend. We were only told on a day that she's not attending our workshop. That workshop was attended by Nadia Khan from design, who was quite happy with some of the elements of our scheme, for example, the horizontal windows, which I can bring the comments if necessary. Obviously, the case officer, Stephen Wilkinson, was also present at the workshop. But unfortunately, the workshop didn't get us anywhere because we couldn't agree on the fundamentals of the scheme. However, we were happy to go back and obviously move the conference room and change the windows and work. Unfortunately, we really felt during that last 12 months that the application's been in, it was really hard to communicate with the officers. I have previously, I've email trails after email trails of trying to organize something. I even asked for a meeting at the pre-application stage and was told that my scheme is too small to meet with, to organize a meeting, even though, of course, we wanted to pay for it. We at this stage that, of course, all these changes could be made, but our workshop didn't work. We didn't have a conservation officer on it. It was too late to postpone it. I understand that conservation officer was off sick that day, which we only found out on the day, as I mentioned. So yes, we will work with the council, but unfortunately, sorry to say that, so far it's been painful. And so far we felt that the council don't want to work with us. And obviously the natural thing for us to do after today, if we can't agree anything, is to appeal it, which will be a shame because we much rather avoid appeal and work with the council and make, compromises on that building. But obviously, also we hired a very experienced conservation specialist who's telling us one thing and a conservation officer is telling another. So we just need to find a common ground because we need to make sure that this building looks good. Because as you know, it is such a prominent building. We care about this building a lot and about this location. And, we are willing to make some changes.
Sorry, Steve, just taking priority there.
I've got Steve, then Councillor Anderson.
I just want to correct Ms Dishler on what she said about the horizontal emphasis, because of course it's vertical emphasis that we're trying to retain, not horizontal, because I think you just made a bit of a mistake there. But just going back, there's a slight contradiction in that, wasn't there? Because on the one hand, the suggestion was that because of our tardiness in terms of the meetings, you want a decision to go to appeal with, in which case we could simply go to the refusal now, if that's the case, or is if members are minded, I'm trying to assist it. If members are minded for a deferral, actually we're talking about a deferral to try and overcome some of the amenity issues, which might include lifting the heights of the windows, which takes us back towards what we were looking at to begin with, which is the critical style window heights, etc. But then further discussions with regard the external design and the roof design. So you could defer it for further discussion, but that's obviously whether the applicant's willing to engage in that, because
as chair, I'd like to come in. I know you both want to come in, but I just want to say, I think I'm getting the feeling in the room that members are happy to defer for this extra work to be looked at on the building. I believe the applicant is happy to work with planning officers and conservation officers to do that as well. Am I right? Yes? Yes, you are? Yeah.
The last 18 months.
Well, can I just say, if things have gone on over the last 18 months and things have gone on over the last 18 months, but if we can defer this and try and come to an agreement, then I think we would like to do that. I'm going to bring you in now, and then I'm going to bring Councillor Anderson in. Thank you.
I just wanted to correct some of the points, which was a bit of an attack on myself and colleagues in terms of how we've approached this. So the application's been in a year, and you'll remember that I showed you the plans of what's proposed now. And when I brought in the 3D image, I showed you what it was, and I caveated that saying there's been some minimal changes. So it's been in a year, and we've only managed to get these absolute tiny changes. And we've given them significant comments, heritage-led comments, on several occasions during the application, and we've just been met with no changes whatsoever, as well as we did have a workshop, and Kate was ill. You can't help that, the day before, but we have given them detailed heritage comments, and we've just had nothing in return. And the impression I got was that they weren't willing to be flexible. I mean, this is a whole new side of it I've seen today. But in terms of in terms of the comments we've given them, we haven't had a response to that.
Right. Okay. I think we need to draw a line and move on. Absolutely. Councillor Anderson and then Councillor Finnegan.
The way that the debate was going, I mean, originally I was happy with the refusal, right? So now it would appear that we're going to be moving there. An issue that came out again that I would like further clarity then, if we are getting further information, is that somebody, might have been me, asked about how the rooms were going to be aired. And there was a comment made that it was thought that the windows wouldn't be able to be opened, and that there would be the use of an air conditioning unit. That was the speculation. It wasn't down here. So if that was the case, can we get clarity on whether or not, because I was me that asked whether the windows could be opened. Now, if the windows can be opened to naturally, you're then back to the noise effect, positively or negatively, as to what effect that would have. So can we, if we are going to be trying to do things about getting the windows changed and about getting air in, and then we've got the climate change emergency things that would need to be then considered. If we were deferring it, we would need to start looking at things from the climate change as to whether or not the air conditioning unit and the carbon cost to that is better or worse than the noise damage that can be done if we allow light. It's a balance in judgment. Just that's what I'm getting at, yeah.
Thank you. We've got a note of that, Councillor Anderson. Thank you. I think we're moving on to comments rather than questions. I don't know where we seem to be. We're moving into comments. Councillor Finnegan and then Councillor.
My experience with the Conservation Department over 20 years that I've been on the council has been almost entirely painful at this particular point, primarily because I think they do live in a different world to a lot of us. And it would have been helpful, and I hope that if we do have a deferral, which I'm happy to support, we get one of the ward councillors from the Headingley ward to come and talk to us about what the community says to them, their feelings about the whole thing, primarily because sometimes you have to be a little more pragmatic on buildings you want to save, primarily because of the sheer expense of trying to save them. The alternative is you end up year after year after year with no realistic, sustainable solution to it, and ends up with problems and difficulties. We had a fabulous St Mary's in Morley. People may or may not know it. Fabulous church at this particular point. Kicked it around for year after year after year. It got burnt, and it is now a particular ruin. While we debated whether we can be pure in pure conservation terms, I'd like to hear, if we do have a deferral, from one of the ward members that have supported it coming to panel, so we can hear their particular point of view, and they can be the community leaders that they clearly are, and give us a community element towards this. I'm sure that there must be a condition survey in here. The planners are basically saying we've no information about, whether it's financially viable to do this or not to do this with this particular building. I'm sure there must be a condition survey that the applicant has available that will show the degree of investment that is required to make sure that this building survives. And when we've got that information and we hear from those, we'll be in a better position to be able to make a balanced judgment about what we do with this particular building, which looks a great building that we need to survive. But we need more information than we've got in front of us, including the local ward council element, in my view.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Finnegan. Councillor Walshaw from the back is indicating he would be more than happy to come and fulfil that role, so thank you. I just want to bring Steve Butler in on one point that you made, Councillor Finnegan, and then I'll take Councillor Smith.
I'm just trying to capture the potential additional information that's required. So I might actually go over this again. But in terms of that last comment, in essence, we're asking for a viability assessment to justify the extent of the works and the internal arrangement. Is that what Councillor Finnegan's requesting?
Available. The issue is always going to be a balance between whether it's economically possible to have, I don't know, a restaurant or whatever at this particular location, or whether this is probably or possibly one of the only solutions. Now, a condition survey, which I'm sure must be available to somebody, will at least give us an indication of the investment that's required. Now, when we go into viability, having sat here and endured loads of viability processes when we looked at affordable homes and other such things, that's a big thing to ask. It's an expensive thing to ask. I'm not sure that's available. I would have thought that a condition survey is something that is available that we can at least analyse and have a view as to what investment is required to make sure that this building survives. The viability thing, we've all been here. We don't want to go down that particular path because it's expensive. It takes time. We're in a situation where we want a little more information about why we should flex on this particular occasion, because I'm, at this particular point, not ferrying one side or the other. I want more information before I make a judgment on whether we need to be flexible, whether it is financially viable, whether there are other alternatives or whatever. We haven't got that information. And I always think local ward member involvement is particularly important on these occasions. We need to understand it from their point of view as well. I hope that's helpful, Steve. I very rarely am.
And I appreciate that admission. Thank you, Councillor Finnegan. I still do think that those two things are effectively interlinked, because a condition survey will only actually tell you whether the fabric of the building is threatened, but it won't actually tell you whether this particular proposal is required. So they are interlinked. So hopefully we'll get the right information back if this becomes a deferral. But I did just want to make that point. Purely a conditions survey just tells you how threatened this building in terms of whether the works are not carried out. You do need some sort of viability assessment to justify that this level of works is required to actually justify the building's redevelopment.
I don't want to endure the pain any longer than is entirely necessary at this particular point, but we have a condition survey that's been undertaken by council officers that they're using at this particular point to try and understand the investment needs of a heritage building in the Morley area. At that point, what they come back to me and says, yeah, we got the condition survey and it'll tell you we need to spend X amount on it. So I think the condition survey is indeed likely to be helpful and give us an insight that we need. We're going to make a balanced judgment on this.
From my perspective, I have to agree to disagree, but I mean, ultimately it's the chair. I have captured the point. So hopefully if we do get to a point of deferral, we've got the right information, which I will reiterate when the chair's ready.
Okay, Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Chair. I think my comment on this is, again, it's probably down to viability of the development. If we go to deferral and ask for this information and the applicant works with the conservation officer, you know, we're going to want the roof keeping, or at least part in part. And given the response I got to my question earlier, I don't think that the applicant will consider it a viable development. So that's my concern.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Councillor Bowden.
When we were at the site visit, as well as sort of the noise being a detriment to the people there, there's also the kind of discussions about the windows being in such close proximity and potentially being banged on and stuff like that, and potential issues with that. Has there been in the vicinity, because actually when you look at all the other properties around, I mean, I personally don't want the windows dropped, but nearly all the other properties, actually windows are dropped, including the grade 2 listed building. Well, sorry, the listed building that I presume is down. Has there been any incidents of any windows, including that? I think, has it been said that they own the next door property as well, where the windows at the front, have they been smashed in, or have they been banged on? Has there been disturbances that we're aware of that then would impact on the people staying in the apartment hotel?
I'm speaking for Steve because he's the case officer, but I'm assuming we have no information whatsoever of it actually happening. It's just it's a perception stroke assumption based upon where it's located in proximity to the crossing and to other very active uses such as the Arc and the Taps public house at the back. So we don't have that, no.
Okay, colleagues. And I think we're moving to our decision on this. So I think Councillor Reagan wants to make a proposal that we move to a decision.
Can I propose that we defer for working group with the conservation officer and the applicants to come up with a more viable proposal?
Okay, and Councillor Giovanni, you're seconding? Yep, thank you. Steve, you will have form of words for us through all our discussions. I know you've been scribbling away there.
Well, it obviously at this point, it's really for my officers to be absolutely clear as to what they're trying to achieve for the members' benefit. So the things that I've captured here, so it's obviously been motion that it's deferred further discussions with the applicant to include, and this is where it gets a little bit trickier, further discussion on the design, in particular regard to the critical windows in terms of height and emphasis, because that was an issue that was raised. Further discussions with the applicants regarding the roof design to be more in keeping stroke sympathetic to the property. Councillor Anderson asked about the method of ventilation of the rooms and assessment of how this would be sustainable. So we've got that as well. Obviously, the request to reward members to actually attend to give their perspective when it comes back to panel. A condition survey, which despite our slight opposed opinions here, the comment that was made that a condition survey is required to actually justify the economic investment needs. So the two are into.
Don't forget the change layout of the conference room.
Yeah, interlinks the change layout, and the other thing that I had was about the quality of any internal design that might need. It was assessment of what if there was anything internally that needs to be kept. So I think was that everything.
Was there anything about noise assessment?
I was just going to say noise.
Well, I think if we're talking about the ventilation and how the windows are going to be looked at, I think we'd have to obviously have some justifications to whether the amenity could be overcome. So in effect, it's a noise assessment, I suppose.
Cooling.
Yeah, I got
the climate emergency.
Got that. Yeah.
And whether the noise impacts.
Yeah.
As all, yeah.
One up against the other.
Yeah.
I think that's.
Chair, obviously it's been moved and seconded. We've got these elements here. They will appear in the minutes of the next panel meeting. So if there's any question of them that I've not got it correctly, obviously it can be corrected at that point, and we will arrange something with the applicant to discuss all of these issues. So really it's to take a vote on the.
Can I just say, Right. Councillor Finnegan said about the ward member coming back and we're hearing from them. We will hear from them as long as they're working with the developers, because getting their feedback from the community, you know, so it's no point they're just coming back and giving us their view. You know, have they worked with the developers as well as got feedback from the community?
They need to be actively involved in the process to find a solution to the application. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, Chair. Sorry, bearing in mind the discussions that we've had earlier on two applications about material considerations, whether they were new. Obviously, the thing that Councillor Finnegan raised actually brings the opportunity for further speaking. Now, I think we'd have to discuss that with the chair, which is unlikely to be Councillor Heselwood at the point that we bring it back, because really, ultimately, a bit like the application for Hague Wood, we've discussed all of these issues and we're bringing back answers to those questions. So they're not necessarily new material considerations. So whether we get to a point, depending upon the information that is provided by the applicant, as to whether we then have to, at the point we get to chair's brief, we discuss that with the chair, and the chair then decides to exercise their prerogative to actually allow further speaking. And Nikki may want to add to that if I've not got it correct.
We are the for and against with regards to that other application. So that is why I believe the chair said that we weren't going to have it. This application, we've only had the applicant. So we're Councillor Finnegan is asking to hear from the ward members, because they'll be working with the community, because there's been no objections, as far as I read, not unless I've missed it, from members of the public. And that's why Councillor Finnegan is saying that the councillor could speak on the behalf. That's why. So why wouldn't the chair allow that? Because we haven't had a against or a for, we've just had the applicant presented.
Can I assist? Can we not predetermine what information we're going to get? We've got the parameters of what information you seek. One of those issues is one point that Councillor Finnegan has raised as a new issue. We don't know what the content's going to be. Let's wait for that information to come back, and then we can make an assessment as to whether it sits within the protocol or whether there needs to be some discretion applied, whether it is significant new information or if it's a new material consideration. Let's go through that and then we can talk about speaking rights. That's the only advice I'd give at this stage.
Thank you, Nikki. That
will only be the chair's decision. It wouldn't be the panel decision.
Can I take the advice that Nikki's given us? All we need to do now is decide whether we vote for or against the proposal on the table. When Councillor Taylor is back and she will be chairing, hopefully, the meeting where this comes back to, then we can discuss that at that point, because I don't think we can determine who's going to speak now, because we don't know what information is going to come back. I presume there'll be new information, so I presume we'll be able to have speakers, but we don't know at the moment. Yeah. So can I move to the vote, or do we have anything else we need to add?
No, that covers the issue completely.
Right. Colleagues, can we move to the vote? So the new proposal on the table, which hopefully we've got right, please do check it in the minutes when they come out to make sure that we've included everything that we've talked about. So can I ask members whether they want to vote for, first of all, for that proposal? To defer, sorry, yes, the proposal that Steve Butler's read out to defer with those conditions. Sorry.
6. And any against?
Against? Abstentions? 2 abstentions. Okay. Thank you, colleagues. So anything else?
No, I'm just
Apart
going to
from-
summarise that the application has been deferred by members, 6 for it and 2 abstentions, and obviously the list of things I've read out, and we'll put in the minutes for clarity later. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Do check the minutes to make sure we've got all those in. Thank you for your perseverance, and I believe the next meeting is the 7th of July. So I will see you all then. Thank you.